Chapter 1076. Cough, cough. When Li Yi saw that Su picked up the wine pot and gulped it down, he knew that he might have choked because he had eaten too much chicken. The one who loved to eat chicken was second granduncle. In order to satisfy his craving for good food, there were 5 cooks in the family who specially made chicken for him. There were a variety of methods, including dozens of methods and over a dozen cuisines. Occasionally, they would even create new methods. Su didn't like to eat chicken in the past. He loved White Rabbit creamy candies. However, he couldn't stand eating too much sugar when he was old, so he started to imitate second great uncle. Li Yi knew that Su was actually from the Wu Kingdom. For most masters, those mundane things could no longer pique their interest. They pursued higher martial arts. Most of them would choose to travel around in search of opportunities to break through again. Of course, Su's opportunities were not outside but here. Li Yi walked over and sat opposite him. He asked, "White Rabbit creamy candies have released a new type of milk candy with low sugar content. It won't spoil your teeth. Su, do you want to try it?" The sloppy old man didn't even raise his head. He said, "Tell me, what do you want me to do?" It was great to talk to such a straightforward person. He was straightforward and didn't beat around the bush. Li Yi thought about it and said, "Su is also from the Wu Kingdom. I don't think you want to see the people of the Wu Kingdom suffer from war and live in misery. I'm not going." The sloppy old man wiped his mouth and said even more straightforwardly. Li Yi was stunned. "I haven't said what it is. You want me to protect that little girl." The sloppy old man looked at him and said, "I'm not going to the Wu Kingdom." It wasn't good to talk to such a straightforward person at all. The sloppy old man stood up and said, "With your second young mistress and the experts on the heaven list, even a master won't be able to do anything. Moreover, the only master left in the Wu Kingdom is Yang Wanli. He's also a member of the Yang royal family. He won't do anything to that little girl." Li Yi originally thought that there was nothing to worry about in the fringe with Rui and second great uncle by his side. There were also many guards outside. Yang Liuking's trip back to the Wu Kingdom was fraught with danger. With a master by his side, he didn't have to worry too much about his safety. However, since Elder Su said so, he did not insist. After all, Elder Su was a guest, not a servant of the Li family. He thought for a while and asked curiously, could it be that the Wu Kingdom only has 2 grandmasters, Elder Su and Yang Wanli? 2. The sloppy old man waved his hand and said, 3, isn't there another one here? That's even more impossible. Anyway, don't worry, there aren't that many idle grandmasters in the Wu nation. The sloppy old man seemed to be very unwilling to talk about this topic. After saying that, his figure quickly disappeared. Li Yi looked at the old man's back and shook his head. Perhaps he was really thinking too much. At first glance, Rui, second great uncle, Su, Chang, the Taoist priest with the surname Yuan, and the Taoist nun in the Qi kingdom were all masters. It seemed like masters were everywhere. But when he thought about it carefully, he didn't seem to have heard of any other masters besides them. He stretched his body and walked back to his room to finish writing the unfinished plan. Yang Liuking knocked on the door and walked in. "Uncle, you were looking for me?" Li Yi nodded and took out a book from the drawer. He handed it to her and said, "Keep this. It will be of great use in the future." Yang Liuking took it and looked at it. She was stunned and looked at him. "Uncle, this," Li Yi pointed at the book, Rebellion, "what you need to know," and said, "This book is a general program and also a basic introduction. You can read it after you go down and see if you can understand it. If there is anything you don't understand, you can ask me. As for the next step of the plan, you can modify it according to the actual situation." Sorry, I took the wrong book." He saw the cover of the book and was stunned. He immediately took back the book, Queen Training Plan, from Yang Liuking and put it back into the drawer. He handed the book, Rebellion, What You Need to Know, to her and said, "This is the book. Read it carefully these few days. I still have something to do, so I'll leave first." When he reached the door, he paused and said, "From now on, you have to be extremely careful with every step you take. It's time to get rid of those spies among your people. Other than the 2 guards by Yang Fu's side, Li Yi believed that there were still many spies planted by the martial emperor's side. The existence of these people would always be a threat, and as for how to identify and deal with them, he believed that they had their own methods. Both Wei Liang and Chen Qing came from the military, and each of them had a group of absolutely loyal personal guards who had gone through fire and water with them. It was impossible for them to be disloyal. First, these people were eliminated. There were still a few dozen of them left in the fringe. They were all left in a mountain. They did not have to worry about food and clothing here, but it was impossible for them to send any news out. Whether there were spies among them or not, it wouldn't matter anymore after a few years. After this round of cleansing, they had less than 500 soldiers. Including the first batch of people arranged by Lu Meng, they only had a little more than 600. However, their combat strength couldn't be simply measured by the number of people they had. Not to mention that some of them were experts who could fight against 10 or even dozens of experts. Even with Divine Punishment's excellent equipment, it was enough to easily deal with the elite troops of the Wu Kingdom. Of course, they had only a few people they could use to begin with. If they wanted to turn the situation around with such a small number of people, only fools would go head-on against the army of the Wu Kingdom. Yang Liuqing and the others probably still needed some time to prepare. When the first step of the plan was formulated, they would walk out of the fringe and take the first step of the revolution. Originally, he wanted to discuss with Drunken Mo about a few trendy underwear styles, but Old Man Wang came looking for him. They could only slowly talk about the underwear at night. Li Yi admired Old Man Wang very much. He was avant-garde and bold. Although he was old, he wasn't pedantic at all. This was very rare in the current era. Moreover, in the future revolution, as the former prime minister and the role model of the literati of the Wu Kingdom, Old Man Wang would play a very big role. Rui and Yang Liuqing were both martial artists. It was very easy for them to carry a knife and kill people. However, if they were to talk about unifying their thinking, the United Front, how to fight the land war well, how to establish and govern a base after a great victory. Not only would they have a headache, but Li Yi himself would also have a headache. Professional things should be done by professionals. These days, after Jiang of Silla's explanation, I'm suddenly enlightened. After Old Man Wang walked in, he first bowed to Li Yi. In fact, it was more than a sudden enlightenment. After talking with Li Yi for the past few days, he finally understood that there was so much to learn about rebelling. Many aspects of it were similar to governing a country through different means. He had long heard that Jiang of Silla was the best in the world and was also a famous minister in the Jing Kingdom in the past. He always thought that the rumors were exaggerated. Today, after experiencing it personally, he understood that those rumors were actually not true. You're welcome. Li Yi waved his hand and said, Prime Minister Wang, is there a problem today? Old Man Wang nodded and said, Jiang of Silla should also know that the traitor who usurped the throne was insane. After killing his brother and father, he was still worried that there would be others who would threaten his throne, so he slaughtered the Yang clan with groundless charges. Li Yi nodded. He had also heard of what Emperor Wu had done. This was not only insane, it was practically antisocial and anti-human. No one would do such a thing. In this way, other than that traitor, there are no more males in the Yang clan. After Her Royal Highness ascends the throne, that traitor will definitely not be able to escape death. A trace of worry appeared on Old Man Wang's face, and he said, but after Her Royal Highness, who should this vast world be handed over to? Li Yi understood Old Man Wang's worry very well. For example, the Jing Kingdom belonged to the Li family. It was fine for Li Xian or Li Han to sit, but Li Yi himself could not sit. Emperor Wu had killed all the males in the Yang clan. In the future, Empress Yang Liuqing would be bored, so she could not casually choose someone with the surname Yang to pass the throne to. Actually, what Old Man Wang said was wrong. Didn't the Yang clan still have Yang Fu? Forget it, Old Man Wang already thought he was dead. He respected the dead, so he would not mention it. However, on this matter, the Empress in the other world had already given an answer. Li Yi looked at Old Man Wang and said, what's so difficult about this? When your princess has children in the future, just pass it to her son. What flows in his body is still half Yang clan's blood, no? This was a very easy problem to solve. Let Yang Liuking's son have the surname Yang, and then inherit the throne. Old man Wang's thoughts were still limited, but it was already not easy for him to think of the empress. This couldn't be circumvented, and Li Yi could understand. Although Yang Liuking's child, in terms of bloodline, could not be compared to the orthodox Yang clan's royal family, if she became the empress, this wouldn't be a problem. In the other world, there was still someone who wanted to pass the throne to his nephew. Old man Wang came to a sudden realization and clasped his hands, saying, "Thank you, Jiang of Silla, for dispelling my doubts. I thank you on behalf of the people of the Wu Kingdom." "You're welcome." Li Yi waved his hands again. The child born by Yang Liuking would inherit the Wu Kingdom, so what was there to thank him for? He couldn't help her give birth to a son. Chapter 1077. Although Li Yi was her martial uncle, as a martial uncle, he could help Yang Liuking rebel, but he couldn't help her give birth to a son. He only cared about how Yang Liuking would ascend the throne, avenge her father and brother, and realize his long-cherished wish. As for who she would pass the throne to after she became the empress, it was not something he, as a martial uncle, needed to worry about. Old man Wang came with doubts and confusion. After Li Yi's guidance, he left with a happy face. After a while, Wei Liang and Chen Qing came again. For this martial nephew, Li Yi really worried a lot. Not only did he have to help her make a plan, but he also had to help her subordinates improve their ideological level. Wei Liang and Chen Qing were both former border generals, but guarding the border was different from rebelling. Li Yi needed to teach them how to start the first war, how to improve the military system, including how to expand the organization, how to do a good job in the United Front, and how to create a wave. Li Yi had always advocated that special people be used for special purposes, and the ideological work was handed over to old man Wang. He was very reassured. How to make nursery rhymes, how to stuff silk into a fish's stomach, how to write persuasion forms, he was definitely a professional. And Wei Liang and Chen Qing, their responsibilities were actually more important. How to develop their camp from 500 people to 50,000 people, how to fight every battle, how to defend every city, how to help the empress clear all the obstacles along the way. Such a heavy burden would be on their shoulders. Unknowingly, they had talked for more than 2 hours. Li Yi waved his hand tiredly and said, "Let's stop here for today." When the two left, they bowed deeply to him. These days, what they learned from Jiang of Silla was enough to use for a lifetime. Li Yi leaned against the back of the chair, closed his eyes, and rested for a while. Although he was a little tired, it was worth it. Not to mention that he did all this to help his martial nephew, but also to satisfy some kind of complex in his heart. Moreover, Rui had become much gentler to him these days. It was all worth it. He leaned against the chair. After an unknown amount of time, a pair of hands appeared on his shoulders and began to gently press down. It was not Rui, Xiaohuan, or Ruoqing or any of them, only Rui would use such a jerky technique. He was in a dilemma. On one hand, he hoped that Rui would continue to be gentle, but on the other hand, he hoped that she would return to her original self. She was becoming less and less like herself. If she deliberately suppressed it, would she be unhappy? Of course, it was only out of concern for Rui, and not because he had some weird fetish or awakened some attribute that he shouldn't have awakened. At some point, Rui's hand on his shoulder paused and said, "Thank you." "Thank me for what?" Li Yi opened his eyes and asked in confusion. "Thank you for being willing to help her." "I'm helping her, why are you thanking me?" Mississippi Lu did not answer. Li Yi thought about it and waved his hand. He said, "Actually, it's not as complicated as you think. Think about it, if your disciple becomes the empress, you will be the empress's teacher, and I will be the empress's martial uncle. My seniority will be higher than the empress's, and it will be so prestigious." Mississippi Lu paused and asked, "You're doing this for this? What else could it be?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "Besides, if she becomes the empress, you will be the empress's teacher." At that time, even if Emingzu really becomes the empress, won't you still be better than her? Mississippi Lu frowned and said, even without this matter, I will still be better than her. There was no need for a family to be so calculative. Li Yi naturally would not mention that she had lost to Mingzhu in a duel. He shook his head and said, aren't I just adding flowers to brocade? Mississippi Lu seemed to have thought of something and asked, since you helped Yang Liuqing to ascend the throne because you want to be the empress's martial uncle, then what did you want to do when you made Emingzu the empress? Li Yi closed his eyes and said, I've been talking to them for too long. I'm a little sleepy. I'm going to sleep for a while. He was actually really sleepy, but the hands on his shoulders were getting stronger and stronger, making it hard for him to fall asleep. Tsang Province. Tsang Province was located at the northwest border of the Wu Kingdom. Although it was not considered a barren land, it was too far away from the imperial capital and bordered the fringe. From time to time, bandits would come out of the mountains to wreak havoc. For hundreds of years, the people of Tsang Province had been plagued by bandits. In the past 2 years, the bandits in the fringe had been eliminated, but the lives of the people had become even more difficult. Ever since the Wu Kingdom fell into chaos a few years ago, the imperial court had lost control of Tsang Province. In the past few years, Tsang Province had changed hands several times. First, a tyrant took advantage of the chaos in the country and attacked the provincial capital. He killed the provincial governor and his assistant officials and proclaimed himself king. Of course, they were annihilated by the imperial court a few months later. After that, Tsang Province was attacked by several other tyrant forces. The imperial court retreated and retreated. 2 years ago, Princess Duanrong used her iron fist to wipe out the rebellious forces in Tsang Province. She promulgated several policies to benefit the people, allowing the people of Tsang Province to have a short period of time to recuperate. Unfortunately, good times did not last long. Just a year ago, Princess Duanrong was besieged by the imperial court and several enlistment forces. After the defeat, there was no news of her. On the surface, Tsang Province had been reclaimed by the imperial court. However, with the imperial court's military strength, they were unable to suppress the rebellious forces that took advantage of the situation in the past year. The people suffered from the rebellious forces and their lives were extremely difficult. In a village several dozen miles away from Tsang Province's capital, a white-haired village chief was kneeling on the ground, tears streaming down his aged face. He pleaded, Lord Steward, please give us a little more time. Please give us a few more days. 2 days ago, the village was robbed and we only have this little bit of food left. If you take this food away, we won't be able to survive. A middle-aged man dressed in a satin robe glanced at him and said coldly, it's only right and proper to pay a debt. What does it have to do with me that you were robbed? I only know that if you can't pay the rent that you are supposed to pay, the master will punish me when I return. If I give you a little more time, who will give me a little more time? He looked at the people behind him and said, what are you waiting for? Take all the food away. The servants carried the sacks on their backs. Among the crowd below, more than 10 men dressed in coarse clothes had grief and indignation on their faces. However, they could only stand where they were, not daring to make any sudden movements. If they made a move on these people, the ones who would come knocking on their door tomorrow would be the constables of the government. Watching as the people carried the food onto the horse carriage, the middle-aged man looked down and frowned. You've only paid less than 30% of the rent. I'll give you half a month's time. If you still can't pay after half a month, don't blame me for being impolite. Half a month. The village chief watched as the people carried the last of the village's food away. He collapsed on the ground with lifeless eyes and muttered, half a month, half a month. Half a month, everyone will starve to death. He sat on the ground and pointed at the sky as he cursed, damned heaven, you're not giving us a way out. You're sending us to our deaths. None of the villagers spoke. Their eyes were empty as they stared blankly in front of them. The autumn harvest had just ended, and all the food had been robbed by the bandits. Unable to pay the rent, the master had plundered all their food. There were nearly 100 mouths in this village, and they were about to run out of food. How could they survive until the next year? this King world doesn't give us a way out at all. How good would it be if Her Royal Highness was still here, Xiao Yun, Xiao Yun. The woman's panicked voice woke everyone up and they all looked in the direction of the voice. A 7 or 8-year-old girl with messy hair and ragged clothes was lying on the ground. The woman crouched on the ground and picked up the girl, shaking her in panic. Xiao Yun, what's wrong with you? The village chief crawled up from the ground and quickly walked over. He touched the girl's forehead and shook his head. This child has been sick for a few days. Hurry up and find a doctor. If we delay any longer, she'll die. The woman's face was filled with despair. They couldn't even eat, so where would they find the money to find a doctor? She hugged the girl and cried, Xiao Yun, I'm so sorry, sister-in-law, what happened? The woman raised her head when she heard the voice beside her. She saw a young man walking over from the side of the road. The young man walked to the woman's side and crouched down. He pinched the little girl's philtrum and she slowly regained consciousness. She looked at the woman and weakly said, Mother, I'm hungry. The woman hurriedly wiped her tears and said, Mother will go find something for you to eat. The young man took out a package from his bosom. After opening it, he took out a steamed bun and handed it to the little girl. Eat something first. The little girl was startled. The next moment, she took the steamed bun and wolfed it down. The young man turned back and said to the man with a Red Cross armband standing on the side of the road, This little girl is sick. Come and take a look at her. He looked at the woman and smiled. Don't worry, he's a doctor. All of this happened very quickly. The woman was stunned for a moment before she immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed to the young man a few times. She loudly said, Thank you for your great kindness. Thank you for your great kindness. The young man shook his head and smiled. There's no need to thank me. If you want to thank someone, thank the Heavenly Empress. Chapter 1078. The situation in Sangzhou had always been tense. Normally, when strangers passed by the village, if they stayed in the village for too long, they would be questioned. They had to be careful because there were too many precedents. If they were careless, it could lead to the destruction of the entire village. However, the people that appeared in the Dong family village today were not on guard. They were not people from the government, nor were they bandits that went down the mountain. Whether it was the government or bandits, they would not give the villagers free medical treatment, free medicine, or give their food to the villagers to eat. If these people were bad people, then they would want to meet bad people like them every day. The young man handed a few doses of medicine to the woman and said, Sister-in-law, this child only has a slight cold. Remember to boil 3 bowls of water into 1 bowl when you boil the medicine. He will be fine after drinking these medicines. We'll come back in 2 days. Thank you, benefactor, for saving our child. When the woman reached out to take the medicine, her eyes were filled with tears. She wanted to kneel down again, but the young man quickly helped her up. A man held his hand and firmly said, Benefactor's great kindness is something we cannot repay. As long as there is anything we can do, just say the word. I, Dong Dahai, will climb a mountain of swords or descend into a sea of flames without a frown. The young man smiled and shook his head. We are under the orders of the Empress of Heaven to relieve the suffering of the common people. This is a good deed. If we ask for something in return, wouldn't it damage the Empress of Heaven's merit? The man was stunned and asked, May I ask, benefactor, the Empress of Heaven that benefactor spoke of? A trace of respect appeared on the young man's face. He said, The Empress of Heaven is the embodiment of kindness and benevolence. We have received the teachings of the Empress of Heaven to punish the strong and eliminate evil, to help the people of the world, to eliminate injustice, and to accumulate good fortune for the Empress of Heaven. Many thanks to the Empress of Heaven, many thanks to the Empress of Heaven. After the man heard this, he pulled the woman beside him to kneel down and respectfully kowtowed several times in a certain direction. After they stood up, the young man looked at him and asked, I heard that there is a group of fierce bandits nearby. They rape and pillage and do all kinds of evil. We are under the orders of the Empress of Heaven to eliminate them. I wonder if you know where this one-eyed tiger bandit is now? One-eyed tiger. When the man named Dong Dahai heard this name, he clenched his teeth and a look of hatred appeared on his face. He gritted his teeth and said, "A few days ago, it was them who rushed into the village and stole our food." The young man looked at him and asked, "So, you know where those people are?" "I know, of course I know." The man nodded, then shook his head. He looked at him and said anxiously, "Benefactor, you can't do this. One-eyed tiger has dozens of brothers under him, and each of them has extraordinary skills. Even the government can't do anything to them. If you go, you'll just be throwing your lives away." The young man didn't mind at all and said, "It's fine. You just need to tell me where the one-eyed tiger is." The man's expression changed for a while. A moment later, a trace of viciousness appeared in his eyes as he said, "Benefactor, you saved my family's Xiao Yun's life. If we don't have food, our family will starve to death." His gaze gradually became resolute as he said, "If you're going to find the one-eyed tiger, please bring me along." "Me too. Count me in. I'm going to die either way. Even if I die to the mountain patrol tiger, it's better than starving to death. At least, I can drag someone down with me before I die." More than 10 men rushed in from outside. They were all excited and stood behind Dong Dahai. There was not a single bit of food left in the village. After today, even if they were not killed by the bandits, they would slowly starve to death. Therefore, it was better to follow these people and fight for a chance of survival. In this world, one's life was determined by one's own effort. The young man looked at them and said, "Think about it carefully. If you go, there's a chance that you won't be able to return." The man standing in front of the group shook his head and said with a pitiful smile, "It's still better than starving to death." The village chief of the Dong family walked up to them unsteadily and said, "Even if Benefactor doesn't come, we'll still fight it out with them. Only by doing so will we have a chance of survival. If we don't, the whole village will die together." The young man pondered for a moment and did not refuse. He nodded and said, "Then let's go together." Over 10 strong young men of the Dong family took out hoes and shovels from their houses and carried them on their shoulders. Then, they followed the young man out of the Dong family village and headed in a certain direction aggressively. Who was not afraid of death? In the past, they would not even have the thought of resisting those bandits. However, it was different now. If they did not resist, they would starve to death. They had been forced into a dead end. They only had 2 choices, resist or die. If they did not want to die, they could only resist. Fortunately, they had helpers. These benefactors did not seem to be ordinary people. There were over 10 of them. Together with them, the number of people they had was not far behind the one-eyed tiger. Dong family village. For the survival of the entire village, all the strong young men of the village had been mobilized to fight the most powerful bandits in the vicinity. They swore that they would take back their food. The old, the weak, the women, and the children had all stayed in the village. They stood at the entrance of the village and looked in a certain direction silently. A young child curled up in his mother's arms. He raised his head and asked, "Mom, where did Dad and the others go?" The woman lowered her head and said softly, "Dad and the others went to find food for us. Once they find food, we won't have to starve anymore." Rui City. Li Yi looked down. Yang Luqing, Geezer Wang, Wei Liang, Chen Qing, and several deputies were all there. Even Mississippi Lu found a seat and sat at the back. He nodded, turned around, knocked on the blackboard, and said, "Now, let's start the class. Today, we'll talk about the timing of a rebellion." He cleared his throat and continued, "The timing of a rebellion is very important. Think about it. Has anyone in the Jing Kingdom rebelled now? No one dares to rebel in the Jing Kingdom. Why? Is it because the Jing Kingdom is strong, and the people live and work in peace and contentment? Is it because they have nothing better to do?" Wei Liang nodded thoughtfully. Li Yi pointed at him and said, "General Wei, answer me. Why hasn't anyone in the Qi Kingdom rebelled?" "Someone in the Qi Kingdom rebelled." Wei Liang thought for a while and said, "A few years ago, the first prince of the Qi Kingdom was bewitched by someone. He wanted to implement the Silver of Judgment law in the Qi kingdom. The country was in turmoil. The officials of several states rebelled. It involved many people. Later, it was forcefully suppressed. Sit down. Li Yi glared at him and said, the example of the Qi kingdom's failed rebellion tells us that even a rebellion must be based on principles. When a country is still very strong, blindly rebelling will definitely pay a heavy price. The so-called timing of a rebellion is also the current situation. Several conditions must be met. The world is in chaos, the people have no way to make a living, the imperial court is not trustworthy, the rebels rise together. Obviously, this is the current situation of the Wu kingdom. Later, Li Yi found that it was not easy to change their minds with just words on paper. Old Man Wang was an elite among scholars after all. But it was a bit difficult for generals like Wei Liang and Chen Qing to understand. However, they should understand these things the most. Therefore, he could only return to his old business and set up a small jiang of Silla class. He taught them for an hour every day. Judging from the effect of the lectures these days, the effect was not bad. He looked at the people below who had a look of realization on their faces and spoke again. Before a rebellion, you need to understand the main contradiction of a region. Is it the people and the government, the people and the gentry, or the people and the bandits? Only after you understand the main contradiction can you know what to do next. Only then can you gradually strengthen your troops. Zhangzhou, Dong Village. A group of old, weak women and children quietly waited at the entrance of the village until the sun was about to set. Suddenly, a loud voice shouted, "They're back! They're back!" Everyone's spirits rose. When they looked up, they saw a group of people walking over from afar. They saw their men and sons walking into the village in high spirits. Their faces were full of smiles, and each of them carried a big cloth bag on their shoulders. Chapter 1079. The villagers of the Dong family village entered the village and placed the food on their backs in an orderly manner at the village entrance. The young man walked out from the crowd and said, "This food was brought back by everyone risking their lives. Everyone can take it and divide it among yourselves." The dozens of men standing behind him revealed looks of shame as they heard this. These food were taken from the hands of bandits, but they weren't the ones who took it. They were just standing on the sidelines watching the fun, cheering and cheering. When they arrived, they were already prepared to perish together with the bandits. But after arriving, they discovered that One-Eyed Tiger's group of several dozen people wasn't even enough to fight against their benefactor. They couldn't even help. In the end, they could only help their benefactor tie up those bandits. It was unknown where those bandits were taken. The man named Dong Dahai carried several bags of food and placed them to the side. He said, "Benefactor, this is enough for us. If we take more, it will still be taken by others. You can take the rest of the food away." The young man waved his hand and said, "This is your food to begin with. We can't take it. After you take it back, hide it well and don't let others steal it." The Dong family village people lowered their heads in silence. In times of chaos and natural disasters, food was their life. The government wanted food, their families wanted food, and the bandits on the mountain also wanted food. These people wanted their lives. But today, these strangers that they didn't know treated their illness and helped them steal food from the hands of bandits without asking for anything in return. Dong Dahai was the first to kneel on the ground, knocking his head on the ground. The two men beside him looked at each other and knelt down as well. The villagers of the Dong family village knelt down one by one. Whether they were men or women, young or old, or even the ignorant children, all of them had their heads pressed down by their mothers. The young man stood in front and said, "You don't need to thank me. If you want to thank someone, thank the Heavenly Empress. Remember to live a good life in the future. Don't do evil and do more good deeds. The Heavenly Empress will protect you. If you disobey, we will take back everything that the Heavenly Empress has bestowed upon you." Dong Dahai respectfully said, "Benefactor, rest assured. We will not harm the Heavenly Empress merit." The villagers of the Dong family village also responded. Even after those people gradually left, the villagers were still kneeling on the ground. They looked at the piles of food around them and felt that it was unreal. Dong Dahai took out a portrait from his bosom. This was something that he had requested from his benefactors. This portrait was of the Heavenly Empress. They were only ordinary people and could not do anything for the Heavenly Empress. They could only worship the Heavenly Empress day and night in order to repay her kindness. From today onwards, not only him, but everyone in the Dong village would have to erect a long life memorial tablet for the goddess. Recently, a legend had been circulating outside Sangzhou City. The Wu Kingdom was in chaos, and the people had no way to make a living. The people suffered from the chaos of war and were homeless. The Empress took pity on the people and descended to the mortal world. She sent her believers to help the people in distress and in danger. She helped the people in Sang Prefecture to treat their illnesses for free and gave them vegetarian meals. Many people were saved. There were common people that had received their kindness and willingly joined them. They swept away the bandits that roamed Sang Prefecture and distributed the food they seized to the poor people. In a short period of time, they received the unanimous support of the local people. The Heavenly Empress had a benevolent and generous heart. She spread the word of good in the world and also guided the people of Tsang Prefecture to do good deeds and accumulate good karma. She also left behind a prophecy that not long after, a person of the mandate of heaven would appear and save the people of Tsang Prefecture from their misery. In these past years, the common people heard countless people proclaim themselves as people of the mandate of heaven. Without exception, these people were all exterminated by the imperial court. These people said that they would help the common people, but they actually stole food from the common people and went around capturing people. A long time ago, the people of Tsang Prefecture no longer had any expectations for this so-called person of the mandate of heaven. However, the Heavenly Empress was different. She never desired anything from the common people. She filled the stomachs of the common people and cured their illnesses. The common people believed in her and supported her. When she said that a person of the mandate of heaven would come and save them from their misery, many common people longed for the arrival of this person. Tsang Prefecture City, Provincial Governor's Mansion. A person of the mandate of heaven? The Tsang Prefecture's provincial governor slammed the table and said with dissatisfaction, investigate thoroughly for this official, find out who this group of people is. With such a force appearing outside of Tsang Prefecture City, as the provincial governor, he naturally could not let his guard down. The situation in Tsang Prefecture was chaotic enough. He was the provincial governor in name, but he could only do as he pleased in the prefecture city. Once he left the prefecture city, he would be restricted by those powerful people. It wasn't easy for the imperial court to take down Tsang Prefecture. If there were any unforeseen events here and a few more rebels were born, this provincial governor who hadn't been a provincial governor for long would most likely meet his end. This so-called holy religion that led people to do good must be nipped in the bud. After finishing this matter, he still had to think of a way to find Princess Duanrong's whereabouts. His Majesty had sent him several secret letters, ordering him to find Princess Duanrong at all costs. Unfortunately, the fringe was easy to enter but hard to leave. If he couldn't send troops in, where would he find her? Unless Princess Duanrong could walk out of the fringe on her own and stand before him, he didn't think such a pie falling from the sky would happen to him. In the fringe, Li Yi had just sent off Yang Liuqing and his entourage. In the end, what was learned on paper was still shallow. Rebellion was not something that could be accomplished with words alone. He had already taught them everything that needed to be taught. It was time for them to put it into practice. Tsang Prefecture was the closest to the fringe. It was a place that they had to fight for. Once they conquered and stabilized Tsang Prefecture, the fringe would become their stable support. As long as the imperial court of the Wu Kingdom hadn't swept away all the obstacles in the Wu Kingdom, they would be invincible. They had just set off today, but the arrangements in Tsang Prefecture had already begun several months ago. The holy religion wanted to establish a branch in the Wu Kingdom. Su Zheng couldn't wait to personally lead his men there. The philosophy of the holy religion had long changed to that of helping the needy. They recruited a portion of the people, wiped out the small gangs of bandits in Tsang Prefecture, and distributed all the food and belongings they obtained. Of course, they weren't doing this out of selfishness. There was a difference in the treatment between the followers of the holy religion and the common people. In just a few short months, their troops grew from less than 100 people to a terrifying number. And those bandits and tyrants were all brought into the fringe and turned into productive forces. In these 2 months, Li Yi also deeply understood why the countless rebellious bandits in history would first establish their own religion before they rebelled: a rebellious disciple, a protective master, a lunatic who only wanted to strengthen the holy religion and spread its teachings, and a group of martial arts experts who had long been trained to the point of wanting to see the world plunged into chaos. With Tsang Prefecture as the starting point, who knew how much chaos they would stir in the Wu Kingdom in the end? Li Duan ran over from afar and ran to his side. He asked, "Daddy, Daddy, have Auntie and senior sister left?" Li Yi nodded and said, "Let's go." Li Duan heaved a sigh of relief and murmured, "They're finally gone." Li Yi patted his head and asked, "Are you happy that Auntie and senior sister left?" "If I don't train properly, Auntie will spank Dwayner's butt." Li Duan rubbed his butt and said excitedly, "I'm going to play with little sister and Auntie." Li Duan's fear of Rui was innate. Now that Rui had left with them, he could completely let go of himself. Li Yi looked down the mountain. The path down the mountain twisted and turned until it disappeared into the shade of a forest. Somewhere in the mountains ahead, a troop of nearly 1,000 people was moving slowly. Wei Liang gripped the saber in his hand tightly. The saber was so sharp that it could cut through iron like mud. It was the first time in his life that a troop of 500 soldiers was equipped with such a divine weapon. Apart from that, they were also equipped with the heavenly punishment that struck terror in the hearts of countless people on the battlefield. It was an invincible weapon for sieging cities and killing enemies. However, this was just a precaution. The mission given to them by Prince Jiang of Silla was to take down Tsang Prefecture within a month without shedding a drop of blood. He looked up in a certain direction and clenched his fists. Tsang Prefecture. We're back. Chapter 1080. We haven't eaten for 3 days. Be kind and give us something to eat. Have pity on us. Outside of Tsangzhou City, in a tea house by the side of the official road, a dozen or so refugees, dressed in rags and covered in dust, were leaning against a low mud wall. They held a broken bowl in their hands and weakly repeated the same words. Tsangzhou had always been in turmoil. Some of the commoners had lost their homes and were living a difficult life. They could only flee in all directions. Refugees like this were a common sight along the official road. The teahouse's waiter was annoyed by the noise. He walked over with large strides and kicked one of the people by the wall. He said angrily, "Go away, go away. Don't disturb our business." This teahouse was opened by the side of the official road. Because of the bandits nearby, they hadn't opened for business for half a year. A few days ago, those bandits were taken care of by someone. They only dared to open the tea house again after observing for a long time. However, these refugees, who couldn't be chased away, were lying there like mud, affecting their business. They are all pitiful people. Why make things difficult for them? In the tea house, a man couldn't stand it anymore. He took out a few pieces of dry rations from his bag and distributed them to the refugees. He pointed in a certain direction and said, "Follow this official road and walk another 30 li forward. There is a village called Dong Village. Go there and do some work. At the very least, you will be able to make a living. It is still early, so don't delay on the road. You should arrive before the sky turns dark." "Thank you, thank you." The group of refugees immediately knelt down and kowtowed to express their gratitude. After a few kowtows, they got up and walked in the direction that the man had pointed. The waiter was happy to see this. He shook his head and went back to his work. The man also sat back down. A person sitting beside him suddenly asked in a low voice, "General Wei, it's already so late. Why isn't General Fan here yet? Did something go wrong?" Wei Liang drank a cup of tea and said, "What's the hurry? There are still 15 minutes. Blind Fan always delays things to the last moment. Wei, I heard you bad-mouthing me from afar. I haven't seen you for more than a year and you've only gained this bit of skill. A loud voice came from outside the door. A man walked in and sat across from Wei Liang. This man was tall and mighty. One of his eyes was blind, and a knife scar ran diagonally through his eye, making him look somewhat terrifying. Behind him, there were more than 10 people on horseback. A murderous aura spread out, causing the few people in the shop to feel nervous. Wei Liang glanced at him and said lightly, "I haven't seen you for more than a year. Blind fan, you've become more capable. If I didn't know better, I would have thought that you're a bandit from somewhere." The waiter of the tea house walked over nervously and asked in a trembling voice, "Sir, what would you like to order?" Wei Liang placed a few coins on the table and said to the one-eyed man, "Let's talk outside." The group walked out of the tea house and went down the official road. They walked straight into a forest not far away. Wei Liang stopped in his tracks. The people behind him dismounted their horses and knelt on one knee. They said loudly, "Greetings, General Wei." Wei Liang waved his hand and they immediately stood up. The one-eyed man took a step forward and asked in a deep voice, "Where's the princess?" "Her Highness has arrived at Sung Prefecture." Wei Liang looked at him and said, "When we were suppressing the bandits, we heard that there was a powerful blind guy who occupied a mountain a year ago and subdued all the forces within a 30-mile radius. We guessed that it was you." The one-eyed man nodded and asked again, "The people of Tsang Prefecture are saying that His Highness King Jing was assassinated. Is this true?" Wei Liang nodded and did not deny it. The one-eyed man's expression changed. "Then His Highness," Wei Liang waved his hand. "Just treat it as if His Highness King Jing is already dead." The one-eyed man took a few steps back and said in shock, "Then we're, even if King Jing is dead, we still have the princess." Wei Liang looked at him and said, "Do you think that Her Highness is not as good as King Jing?" The one-eyed man wanted to say something, but Wei Liang waved his hand and said, "If there's anything, we'll talk when we see the princess." Some people let go of their horses and rode with the people beside them. Wei Liang and a few of his subordinates got on their horses and rode on the official road. The group of people galloped away, kicking up a cloud of dust. In a remote village in a county in Sung Prefecture, the horses stopped in front of the village entrance. The one-eyed man dismounted and looked into the village with an excited expression. Wei Liang looked at him and said, "Let's go." "Greetings, Her Highness." A moment later, in the courtyard of a house in the village, the one-eyed man knelt on one knee. The muscles on his face trembled and he could not control his excitement. "Get up." Yang Liuqing smiled and said, "General Fan has worked hard for the past year." After the one-eyed man stood up, he shook his head and said, "As long as Her Highness is fine, it's not hard for me." He also met a few deputy generals that he was familiar with and Prime Minister Wang. Before he had time to rest, he was pulled aside by Wei Liang. "Didn't you want to ask about His Highness King Jing?" Wei Liang looked at him and said, "Indeed, King Jing is not dead, but he can no longer support our great cause." After a moment, the one-eyed man came back to his senses. He sighed and said, "I've been worried about this for a long time, but I didn't expect that even Prime Minister Wang wouldn't be able to let King Jing walk the right path." After saying that, he looked at Wei Liang with bright eyes and asked, "What you said just now, is it true? Her Highness really plans to rise up?" Wei Liang looked at him and asked, "What do you think?" A sneer appeared on the one-eyed man's face and he said, "Except for Her Highness, I won't listen to anyone." Wei Liang nodded, but the one-eyed man looked at the thing hanging in front of his chest and asked, "What is this?" Wei Liang took the third eye given to him by Jiang of Silla and handed it to the one-eyed man. The one-eyed man held it in his hand and looked at it for a long time until Wei Liang taught him how to use it. He opened a small lid and brought it close to his eyes. He could even see the expressions of people a few hundred steps away. This is the monocular of the Jing Kingdom." He looked at Wei Liang and said in shock, "This thing is hard to buy. Where did you get it? What is this?" Wei Liang looked at him with some disdain and said, "Lend me your saber." A vigilant expression appeared on the one-eyed man's face and he asked, "What do you want my saber for?" "We are friends, but I won't give it to you. We haven't seen each other for a long time. Let me broaden my horizons." Wei Liang shook his head and said, "Don't worry, I don't want your things." Since Wei Liang said so, the one-eyed man had no choice but to untie the long saber at his waist. Wei Liang held it with one hand and pulled out the saber at his waist with the other. After a few sounds of metal clashing, a few cracks appeared on the one-eyed man's saber. Under the one-eyed man's incredulous gaze, he handed his saber to him and said, "It's just a pile of scrap metal. Don't say it's a saber. This saber is for you. Don't embarrass Her Highness when you go out." The one-eyed man held the saber in his hand tightly and looked at it carefully. He raised his head to look at Wei Liang and asked seriously, "Tell me honestly, what happened in the past year?" Wei Liang smiled and said, "Come here, I'll show you something good." The two of them walked into a house. When they came out again, the expression on the one-eyed man's face could no longer be described as just shock. Fa. He looked at Wei Liang and took a deep breath. After a long time, he asked, "Damn it, tell me honestly, did you guys steal these things from the Jing Kingdom?" Without waiting for Wei Liang to answer, he revealed an excited expression and said, "With these things, what do we have to be afraid of? There are less than 2,000 soldiers guarding Sangzhou. With your people, my people, and these Fa, we can take Sangzhou by tomorrow night." "Take Sangzhou?" Wei Liang looked at him and asked, "What happens after we take Sangzhou?" "Of course we keep fighting forward." The one-eyed man looked at him and said, "With Fa, what do we have to be afraid of?" Wei Liang looked at him and suddenly asked, "Do you know what the main contradiction is and what the secondary contradiction is?" The one-eyed man was startled. He picked his ear and asked doubtfully, "What? Do you know what a unified mind is and what a united front is? Do you know how to establish a revolutionary base, how to fight the agrarian revolutionary war, how to mobilize the strength of the people, how to do diplomatic work and united front work?" The one-eyed man was startled and asked, "What are these?" "You don't know anything. You only know how to fight and kill." Wei Liang looked at him in disdain. He vented the anger that had been in his chest for a long time and asked, "Are you a pig?" Chapter 1081. General Fan really wanted to refute Wei Liang. Wasn't war supposed to be advancing courageously? Killing enemies, breaking cities, fighting all the way to the imperial capital, breaking into the palace, taking down the dog emperor who had usurped the throne, and supporting Her Highness the Princess to ascend to the throne? He had never even heard of any contradictions, ideological battlefront, or base of operations. Precisely because he had never heard of it, he couldn't refute it. He and Wei Liang were old acquaintances. He had always thought that Wei Liang was only slightly better looking than him and had one more eye. When it came to leading troops into war, Wei Liang was no match for him. Otherwise, it would have been Wei Liang and not him who had followed the princess to the east and west. If Wei Liang was better than him in war, he wouldn't have been sent to the fringe to guard the rear. But after not seeing him for more than a year, he couldn't understand what Wei Liang was saying anymore. Not only that, but he also got his hands on so many divine weapons from God knows where. He got the monocular from the Jing Kingdom and Tianfa. If they had these 2 years ago, they wouldn't have lost Sangzhou and wouldn't have fallen to this state. Something that he didn't know must have happened in this 1 year. "I'll teach you these things in the future." Wei Liang patted his shoulder and said, "Send a message back and tell your men to bide their time for now. Her Highness has her own ways to take over Sangzhou. In the future, you better keep your tricks to yourself. If this happened in Rui City, with your brain, you would only be able to build roads and move stones." General Fan temporarily suppressed the anger in his chest. He thought to himself that he would settle the score with Wei Liang after asking the princess about the ins and outs of the matter. A lady came in from outside and looked at the two. "Miss Yang wants to discuss some matters with you." "Who is this lady?" "Her Highness's new maid. She doesn't even call me General, she doesn't know etiquette." General Fan looked at the lady from head to toe and said, "She's quite pretty, but she doesn't have a chest or a butt." "What a pity." Bai Su walked in front of the two and asked Wei Liang, "Your friend?" Wei Liang's face was solemn. "Miss Bai has misunderstood. I don't know him." General Fan was stunned. He turned his head to look at him and asked, "Wei, what do you mean by this? Your surname is Fan." "I don't know what your surname is, and I don't know you either. Don't try to get close to me." Wei Liang waved his hand and said, "I'm going to find Her Royal Highness. Miss Bai, please go ahead." With that, he strode away without looking back. Sigh. Just as General Fan said that, he suddenly shivered and felt an inexplicable chill all over his body. He turned his head and saw that the woman was looking at him. She said expressionlessly, Bai Su, do not fight with nameless people. State your name." He was startled for a moment, then he laughed, crossed his arms and said, "Miss, I, Fan Xiao, have never hit a woman, Fan Xiao." Bai Su looked at him and nodded slightly. "Fan Xiao, right." Wei Liang stepped into a courtyard, knocked on the door, and walked into the innermost room. There were a few people in the room. Yang Luqing, Elder Wang, and Chen Qing were all there. Elder Wang looked outside the door and asked, "Where's General Fan? He still has some matters to attend to." Wei Liang shook his head and said, "There's no point in calling him to discuss this matter. Let's talk about it later." Elder Wang nodded and said, "Our current strength is not strong, so we should try not to attract the attention of the imperial court. Sangzhou is the first step of our great undertaking, so we cannot be impatient. There are 9 counties in Sangzhou, so we should plan 1 county at a time. Finally, we will encircle the provincial capital. We must remember what Jiang of Silla said, build high walls, accumulate grain, and slowly become king. From how to take down Sangzhou with the least amount of effort, to how to forge Sangzhou into an impregnable base, to how to achieve victory in the entire Wu country step by step. They had already gone through tens of hundreds of simulations and established a general plan. What they needed to do now was to implement the plan step by step. Wei Liang. Here. I order you to take down Qin County within half a month. Do you have any objections? Yes, sir. Chen Qing. Here. After an hour, Wei Liang walked out of the courtyard and walked to the front of another courtyard. He asked the guard standing at the door, "Where's General Fan?" The soldier swallowed his saliva and said, "Inside." He walked 2 steps, then turned back and asked, "Where's Miss Bai?" "Miss Bai left an hour ago." Wei Liang nodded and pushed the door open. He immediately saw General Fan sitting on the ground, leaning against the courtyard wall. He was covered in dust, and his eyes were listless as he looked ahead. At this moment, General Fan looked no different from the refugees he had met. He sighed and walked forward, wanting to help him up. "Don't move." General Fan, who was paralyzed, suddenly shouted. 2 streams of turbid tears fell from his eyes. He sniffled and said in a sad voice, "My arm is broken, crack." Wei Liang helped him reattach his arm and helped him into the room to sit down. He sighed and said, "In the future, whenever you meet someone you don't know, especially a woman, you better watch your mouth." General Fan opened his mouth in disbelief. "Is she really a woman?" Wei Liang thought for a moment and said, "I forgot to tell you just now. If you meet any woman here, don't take the initiative to provoke them. If you really fight, even Her Highness is not a match for them." General Fan nodded in hindsight and couldn't help but ask, "Who are these people?" "It's a long story." Wei Liang shook his head and said, "Too many things have happened in the past year. I'll tell you one by one." In the room, sounds of surprise could be heard. "What, Plum's Art of War? You met the real person and listened to his teachings. He also gave you the Qinli mirror? Her Highness is his martial niece. He wants to help us rebel? You have a secret weapon that is even more powerful than heaven's punishment." Wei Liang enjoyed General Fan's surprised expression very much when he was telling the story. When General Fan first learned about these things, in terms of performance, he was just a little better than him. The 2 of them had followed Her Highness the Princess for a long time. Their statuses were similar and they were both generals, so it was inevitable that they would compare themselves to each other. When they met again, he felt extremely carefree when he realized that she had crushed him in all aspects. General Fan finally calmed down and looked at him and asked, Prime Minister Wang asked you to take over Qin County in half a month. Can you do it? Do you need my help? No need. Wei Liang simply waved his hand to show his refusal. Qin County was only a small county in Sangzhou. There was no army stationed in the county. Almost all the troops in Sangzhou were in the state capital. If someone broke through the state capital, these small counties would inevitably fall. Other than some strong people who served in the army and the 3 groups of officials in the county government, Qin County had no other power. Moreover, they had infiltrated each of the 9 counties in Sangzhou. Countless people were their backing, and the small groups of bandits in the country had almost been subdued by them. With the help of those martial arts masters, it was not difficult for them to take down a county. Then I'm relieved. General Fan nodded and asked again, "Oh right, that lady just now, what's her background?" Wei Liang explained, "That is Miss Bai Su. Miss Bai is a friend of Her Highness. Her martial arts are extremely high. Even Her Highness is no match for her. You have not seen Her Highness's master. Miss Lu is the real powerful one." General Fan nodded and said, "Miss Bai is beautiful and has a good figure. She looks soft and weak, but I didn't expect her to be so powerful." Wei Liang couldn't help but laugh and said, "I admit that Miss Bai is beautiful, but if you say that she has a good figure." He patted General Fan's shoulder and said, "Old Fan, when did your other eye become blind?" "Nonsense." General Fan slapped his hand away and said, "I think Miss Bai is good in every aspect." Wei Liang waved his hand and said, "Hey, you don't understand. A woman like Miss Bai with no breasts and no buttocks will not be easy to have children. Whoever marries her will be unlucky." General Fan cupped his hands and said, "You have the guts to say that to Miss Bai. If you have the guts to say it to her face." Wei Qing glanced at him and said, "Do you think I am stupid? I only dare to say it when there is no one else here. If I say it in front of her, wouldn't I be courting death?" "You are not stupid." General Fan looked at him and said with a smile, "If you are not stupid, look back." Chapter 1082. Because General Wei was unwell, the task of taking down Qin County within half a month fell on Deputy General Qin Qing. General Fan hadn't been with them for more than a year, so he was behind in thinking and couldn't keep up with the pace of the times. Prime Minister Wang specifically told them to eat and live together in this half a month. Wei Liang's task became to help General Fan improve the quality of thinking. Ordinary soldiers just followed orders and didn't have high requirements, but as a general, he couldn't be lax in thinking. In the temporary residence, Yang Luqing sat at the table and slowly flipped through the pages of a book. She read every line of words very carefully. General Wei and General Fan only needed to know how to fight a war, but she was different. Not only did she need to know how to win the first battle, but she also needed to know how to strengthen her troops. She needed to know how to survive in the cracks when her forces were still weak. She needed to start from Sangzhou and approach the place that had given her countless nightmares step by step. She even had to think about some more distant things. One day, if she really sat on the throne, what should she do? How could she be a good emperor? She never doubted whether she could do it or not. If Uncle Master said it was possible, then it was possible. Prime Minister Wang knocked on the door and walked in. "Your Highness." After a slight salute, he said, "Qin Qing has gone to Qin County. He used to be stationed in Sangzhou, and Qin County is his hometown. Our people have already infiltrated the county government, and Envoy Su will also provide us with help. With Miss Bai's help, it shouldn't be a big problem to take down Qin County government quietly, got it?" Yang Liuqing nodded. Qin County, including the entire Sangzhou, was almost abandoned by the imperial court. Only about 1,000 soldiers were stationed in the capital of Sangzhou. She only needed to lead 50 elite soldiers to occupy Qin County government. Qin Qing had many masters on this trip, so she wasn't very worried. Prime Minister Wang looked at the open book on his table and sighed, "Your Highness has worked hard these years. Ever since the second imperial prince usurped the throne, he had watched helplessly as the defenseless girl took the young imperial prince Jing and escaped from the imperial capital. They hid all over the place and slowly grew up to become the princess that she was today. He had seen how much hardship she had suffered along the way. Yang Liuqing shook his head and said with a smile, "It's the Prime Minister who's tired. You're already so old, but you still have to run around with us. It's us who've dragged you down." Prime Minister Wang waved his hand and said, "I'm tired, but I'm willing to be tired. If I can see the day your highness ascends to the throne, I'm willing to die of exhaustion." Yang Liuqing smiled and discussed some matters with him before saying, "I'll go and see master." Prime Minister Wang watched her walk out. He caught a glimpse of the elegant handwriting on the open page on his desk, and his gaze slightly paused. He looked outside the door. The princess from 2 years ago was very different from the one she was now. 2 years ago, although she had also tried her best to fight and work very hard, she was confused and had no direction at that time. Now, she would no longer show that kind of confusion and helplessness. There was someone who pointed the way for her, the way for all of them. When Yang Liuqing walked into the next room, Mississippi Lu was looking at the autumn water in a daze. "Master." She walked over and said softly. Mississippi Lu came back to her senses and asked, "Bai Su and the others have left?" Yang Liuqing nodded and said, "They just left with General Chen." She looked at Mississippi Lu and said, "Master, there's nothing to do here for the time being. Why don't you go back to Rui City first? Bai Su and the others are here. Nothing will happen." Mississippi Lu waved her hand and said, "No need. There's nothing important to do when I go back." "What does he want you to do next?" "Let me see the plan." Not long after, Yang Liuqing walked out of the room and came to the courtyard. He looked into the distance and saw a stretch of mountains. Although there was nothing important there were important people there. It was just that master was never willing to face them. It had been 5 years since the second year of Jinghe. If time went back, it would be even longer. It had been so long that even as a disciple, she was worried for her. Zhangzhou, Qin County, the county government. It was late, but the county magistrate of Qin County was still flipping through the files in the front hall of the county government. Recently, Qin County had not been peaceful. Of course, Qin County had never been peaceful. When the Wu Kingdom was still in peace, there were mountain bandits here. Now that the Wu Kingdom was in chaos, there were less mountain bandits here, but now there was a rebellion. Those sons of B***Cheese who could not defeat the regular army of the imperial court did not dare to provoke the prefectural city where the army was stationed. Instead, they targeted the soft persimmon like the county government. His predecessor, the predecessor before him, and the predecessor before him, were all hacked to death by the mountain bandits who rushed into the county government. Ever since the country was in chaos, there were people rebelling in all the prefectures. A place like Zhangzhou, which was already chaotic, naturally became even more chaotic. Every once in a while, a few dozen or nearly 100 thugs would rush into the county government and hack down the county magistrate and a few low-ranking officials. They proclaimed themselves Emperor XXX and declared their right to rule over Qin County. Then, they would be rewarded according to their contributions and conferred titles. This was how his predecessor, the county magistrate, had died. By the time the prefectural city received the news and sent troops to exterminate those rebels, the county magistrate's death had already passed. Although there were also people who would attack the county government, they would only fight and not occupy it. They would seize food, weapons, and horses. In short, they would seize whatever they saw. After they were done, they would leave and hack down the county magistrate and a few low-ranking officials. This was how his predecessor had died. In short, if there was a rebellion in Qin County, the county magistrate would be the first to suffer. The damned provincial governor had already withdrawn his army to the prefectural city. Small county magistrates like them had to live with their heads tied to their waistbands. If they were not careful, they would become the target of others' rebellion. The reason he could live until now was not because there were fewer people rebelling, but because he was careful enough. Once he discovered a clue, he would immediately flee for his life. Recently, in Qin County, there were often illegal gatherings in some villages. Each gathering would consist of dozens or even hundreds of people. In troubled times, as long as there were more than 10 people gathered together, nothing good would happen. This was an iron law. and it was also a bloody lesson he had learned from the deaths of his predecessor, the predecessor before him, and the predecessor before him. If they were discussing a rebellion, he was sure that the county government of Chin County would be their primary target. He could not be an official, but he could not give up his life. This was the life principle he had always followed. Bang! Just as he was carefully reading through the files, trying to find some clues, a few muffled sounds suddenly came from outside the front hall. The county magistrate's heart skipped a beat and he blurted out, "Who is it?" No one answered him, and no one from the yamen runners who were usually on duty outside came in. He almost subconsciously ran to the back, where there was a secret passage that he had people dig in advance. No matter what happened outside, he could run outside through that secret passage. He was not curious about what was happening outside. He knew that the most curious people often died the fastest. However, he had just run 2 steps when a black shadow had already blocked his way. The black shadow looked at him and asked, "Are you the county magistrate of Chin County?" "I'm not." He shook his head violently and said, "I'm afraid you have mistaken me for someone else. The county magistrate is now in the inner residence. Do you want me to take you there?" As he spoke, he walked out of the door, thinking that once the yamen runners were alerted, he would be out of danger. In the yard outside the front hall, a yamen runner had a knife against his neck. When he saw the county magistrate coming out, his eyes lit up. He pointed at him and said, "Hero, this is our county magistrate." The county magistrate of Chin County had already cursed the 18 generations of the yamen runners' ancestors in his heart. He turned to look at the black shadow, knelt down with a thud, and said loudly, "Hero, please spare my life. I'm not the dog official you are looking for. I didn't do anything evil. The bad things were all done by the county magistrate. It has nothing to do with me. I surrender, I surrender." The black shadow looked at him and stood there, not knowing what to do for a moment. He had already thought about how to force the county magistrate of Chin County to submit if he resisted strongly. He had thought of several ways, but he didn't expect that the county magistrate would surrender on his own before they even said a word. The feeling of punching the air with all his strength was particularly uncomfortable. He looked back at the other person and asked, "Sister Bai, what should we do? Do we still need to separate tendons and break bones? Do we need to use poison?" Separate tendons and break bones, use poison. Hearing this, the county magistrate of Chin County suddenly blacked out. Chapter 1083. Chin County was a small county. There were only a few hundred households in the county. The county magistrate and the deputy county magistrate had the responsibilities of the registrar and the county lieutenant. They were in charge of more than a dozen bailiffs and some servants. This was why the rebels liked to attack the county government in recent years. They only needed a few dozen people to occupy the county government and make themselves king. They could establish their power without much difficulty or risk. They could easily start the first war of the rebellion. If they attacked the county government, they naturally had to kill a few corrupt officials. Therefore, for a remote county like Chin County, the county magistrate had become a profession with a high mortality rate. The county magistrate of Chin County hugged the man's leg and said loudly, "Hero, what do you want? I will cooperate with you. Please don't kill me, you have no backbone at all. You're not a man." The man looked at him disdainfully and shook him off. He walked to the woman and said flatteringly, "Sister Bai, leave the things here to us. You should go and rest. If I knew it would be so easy, I wouldn't have come. It would be better to learn from the chief." Bai Su glanced at him and turned to leave. The man looked back at another person and said, "General Chen, I'll leave the rest to you." Chen Qing covered his face with a black cloth and walked to the county magistrate of Chin County. He pulled off the black cloth on his face and asked, "County Magistrate Liu, do you still recognize me?" The county magistrate moved closer to the light. When he looked over, he was shocked and said, "General Chen, you." He fell to the ground and cried, "General Chen, I've been looking forward to the stars and the moon, and you've finally come. You don't know how hard my life has been after you left. "I'd been hoping that Her Royal Highness would come back." The man looked at the county magistrate of Qin County, smacked his lips and sighed. "He's a talent." When the first snow fell in the second year of Jingping, Li Yi threw a letter into the fire. The letter was instantly swallowed by the flames. In the past few months, 7 of the 9 counties in Sangzhou had been secretly controlled by them. The control here did not only refer to the county government, but also the people that Su Jing secretly recruited. Nominally, Sangzhou was still under the control of the provincial governor's office. But in fact, the provincial governor's office had already surrounded Sangzhou. Even inside the provincial governor's office, forces had already infiltrated. There were still 2 counties in the provincial governor's office. In order not to alert the enemy, they had not taken any action yet. Compared to a violent revolution using heavenly punishment and cannons to blast open the city gates, this method of boiling a frog in warm water was more suitable for them now. Once they completely controlled Sangzhou, they could carry out the next step of the plan. Li Yi frowned as he watched the last scrap of paper in the bonfire burn away. After leaving home for a few months, Yang Luqing still frequently wrote letters. Rui actually did not send a single letter back, and did not even come back to take a look. It was really a girl who grew wild, too unreasonable. Li Duan, who was wearing a cotton-padded jacket, ran in from outside and asked, "Daddy, when is Auntie coming back?" Li Duan had really forgotten about the pain of his butt. He missed Rui so soon. Li Yi thought about it and said, 2 more months. She will be back during the new year. Li Duan counted with his fingers and realized that there were still 2 months until the new year. He patted his chest and murmured, "She will be back after the new year." "I'm relieved." After he finished speaking, he ran out of the room once again. Li Yi shook his head slightly as he watched him run out with happy steps. Li Duan was still young. He only remembered Rui spanking his butt. He did not know how good Rui was. 2 months before the new year, the first snow fell in Sangzhou. In previous years, this was the official opening of the gates of hell for the people who did not have much food in their homes. Every year, it was unknown how many poor people would die from hunger and cold. This year was slightly different. Those deranged bandits in Sangzhou had disappeared without a trace. Every county would have a fixed place to distribute porridge. As long as they put in a certain amount of work, they would not be able to fill their stomachs. As long as they had arms and legs, they would not starve to death, and it was enough to sustain their lives. In this year of famine and war, to be able to keep their lives was already a blessing from the gods. No, it was the blessing from the Empress. The Empress was kind and generous. Numerous people in Sangzhou had received her kindness. Many poor people who survived because of her prayed for her blessings day and night. Many people believed in the heavenly Empress words of someone that could save them from the sea of suffering and the chaos of war. But they didn't know when this person that could save them would appear. "Your Highness, other than Yong'an County and Ding'an County in the state capital, the other 7 counties in Sangzhou are already under our control. Each county can mobilize more than 1,000 people. General Wei has already personally contacted Envoy Su in the state capital. Miss Bai just said that several brothers from the alliance have already infiltrated the Sangzhou garrison." Chen Qing reported the various matters to Yang Liuqing and cupped his fists. "What should we do next? Please instruct your Highness." Yang Liuqing thought for a moment and said, 3 days later, occupy the state capital." Chen Qing knelt down on one knee and bowed, "Yes." Actually, a month ago, they were only a step away from occupying the state capital. Sangzhou's garrison of 2,000 soldiers could not be considered elite soldiers. They were stationed outside the city, but they could mobilize more than 2,000 soldiers. They were all elite soldiers who had survived countless battles. In terms of weapons, they were far superior to the Sangzhou garrison. Moreover, for the Sangzhou garrison that had already been infiltrated, it was not difficult to break through from the inside and the outside at the same time. Chen Qing left in a hurry. He needed to discuss the specific plan of seizing the city with everyone and then deduce all the possible changes and possibilities. Even if he was already fully prepared, he could not let his guard down. Yang Liuqing left the room and walked into the courtyard. Looking at the bustling crowd around her, her heart was exceptionally calm. She did not feel the slightest nervousness or urgency of a great battle. This was the first time in several years. The reason was that they already had a well-thought-out plan for Tsangzhou. This was their first battle, and it was also a very important battle. They could only win and not lose. She could not disappoint the soldiers, she could not disappoint her master, and she could not disappoint her martial uncle. Thinking of her martial uncle, her expression froze. She blinked her eyes and rubbed them in disbelief. Her lips parted and she said in disbelief, "Martial uncle." Outside of Tsangzhou, there are still 3 major forces that have been in a stalemate with the government. After taking over Tsangzhou, the first thing to do is to subdue them. Inside the room, Baisu sat opposite Mississippi Lu and said, "I've already sent people to infiltrate those 3 forces." Baisu said a few more things. Seeing that she was in a daze and seemed to be distracted, he said, "Chief, I'll go down first." Mississippi Lu nodded. Baisu walked out of the door and met someone at the door. Her eyes widened and she opened her mouth, but before she could make a sound, her mouth was covered. Her eyes widened even more, and then she became a little angry. Before she could vent her anger, Li Yi raised his index finger and gestured for her to be quiet. Baisu pushed his hand away and gritted her teeth, but she did not make a sound. Li Yi walked into the room, not deliberately suppressing his footsteps. After all, at such a close distance, if he walked quietly, Mississippi Lu would notice him. Her back was facing the door. Li Yi walked behind her and wanted to cover her eyes, but she reached out and grabbed his wrist. Mississippi Lu glanced at him and asked calmly, "Why are you here?" Baisu stood at the door and saw that the chief's expression was no longer in a daze, and there was a trace of hidden joy. She was completely different from before, and he sighed in his heart. Dwainer said he misses you. Li Yi walked to the door and held Li Duan's hand as he walked over and said, "I brought him here to see you." Auntie, Li Duan did miss Rui. When he saw her again, he was so touched that his voice sounded like he was about to cry. Chapter 1084. Li Yi and Li Duan were not the only ones who came to Tsangzhou. In order to strengthen the cohesion of the holy religion, Ruoqing, as the incarnation of the Empress, couldn't always exist in the portrait. She had to show up in front of the believers. This time, Rui and Zui Mo didn't come with them. Rui had to stay in Rui City to preside over the overall situation. Li Mu was still young and hadn't weaned yet, so Zui Mo couldn't leave. Without a grandmaster following them, they couldn't guarantee their safety in extreme situations. Even if Su didn't want to come to the Wu Kingdom, he followed them to Tsangzhou this time. "What are you doing here?" Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked. Based on her understanding of Dwainer, it was impossible for him to miss her. "Dwainer said he missed you." "Of course, this is only one of the reasons." Li Yi looked at Li Duan, who hid far away after calling him aunt, and said, "There's nothing to do in the mountains, so I took him out to see the world and see your progress. Tsangzhou hasn't been conquered yet, right?" Mississippi Lu said, "We'll conquer the city in 3 days." "There are still 3 days. There's no hurry." Li Yi nodded, thought for a moment, and said, "Dwainer just said he was hungry. Why don't you cook a bowl of noodles for him first? If it's convenient, cook a bowl for me too, with more vegetables and more noodles." Whether Li Duan wanted to see Rui for the food she cooked or not, as a father, Li Yi couldn't refuse a reasonable request from a child. He also wanted to see with his own eyes what the current situation in Tsangzhou was like. After the meal, they walked through the village. Yang Luqing explained to him, "We've taken down the 7 county governments in recent days. We've also used some means to control the officials in the county governments. Some of the strong people can be used by us in a short period of time. Now, only the prefectural city is left." It had been several months since they split up and quietly came to Tsangzhou. In addition, before this, Su Zheng had already brought people here to expand the number of believers. Their progress was not fast. However, this was also Li Yi's intention. To the Wu Kingdom, Tsang Prefecture was a remote place, but Tsang Prefecture was close to the fringe. As long as the Wu Kingdom could defend Song Prefecture, no matter how strong the enemy was, they would be able to receive endless reinforcements from the fringe. This was a place that had to be fought for. They had to hold it firmly in their hands and not simply occupy the government office. Otherwise, they would easily end up in the same situation as they did 2 years ago. The remaining snow had yet to dissipate. Walking on the road, one could see many villagers busily working in the village, constructing some strangely shaped buildings. This was a brothel that was about to be built. Any commoner who had a hard time living nearby would come here to work. Even if it was just sweeping the floor or moving wood, they would be able to get 2 meals a day to fill their stomachs. The one-eyed General Fan followed behind them. Looking at the busy people in the distance, he asked in puzzlement, "Your Highness, we are giving out porridge to help the people. Why do we have to make them do all this work? What's the point of building these extra houses? Can't we just give them food?" Prime Minister Wang shook his head and explained, "Because we want the people to know that their porridge and rice are earned through their hard work, not by our charity. It's hard to predict a person's heart. The more we give, the more it will backfire in the end." After saying that, he looked at the one-eyed general and said, "Although you are a general, you can't stop learning. When you go back, General Fan, you must read more books. What I just said is written in the books." At this moment, General Fan could only nod in agreement. Although he still had doubts in his heart, he didn't dare to ask further. At this time, 2 men carrying a piece of wood walked past them. One of them sighed and said, "Tell me, the person with the mandate of heaven that the Empress spoke of, when will he come? When will these bitter days come to an end?" The other man curled his lips and said, "You should be content. Moving logs for a day is enough for your family to eat for several days. What kind of bitter days is this? Who doesn't wish for a better life?" The man paused and suddenly said, "Have you heard that the person with the mandate of heaven that the Empress spoke of can save the people is actually Princess Duanrong?" The man was stunned. He asked, "Where did you hear this?" "Everyone says that when the Empress gave birth to Princess Duanrong, a phoenix landed in the palace and circled around for 3 days before flying away. There are also people who say that Princess Duanrong was able to speak when she was born. When she was born, there was a strange fragrance that wafted for 10 miles. The majority of the imperial capital could smell it. When mortals smelled it, they would feel refreshed and all illnesses would disappear." Someone walked over and heard their conversation. He said in surprise, "Is that true or false? Being born with a human tongue and accompanied by a strange fragrance, that is the sign of a saint appearing in the world." The man carrying the logs shook his head and said, "I don't know if it's true or false, but I've also heard that this is the sign of an emperor. In ancient times, all those who had these signs eventually became emperors." The passerby disdainfully said, "Forget it. Princess Duanrong is a woman. Can a woman become an emperor?" The gaze of the man carrying the logs became even more disdainful. He said, "I said that you are ignorant and inexperienced, but you don't believe me. Let's not talk about the distant past and just talk about the recent past. The emperor of the Jing Kingdom is a woman. She governs the country better than men, so why can't the emperor of my Wu Kingdom be a woman?" The passerby was startled and asked in surprise, "Is there really such a thing? Why would I lie to you?" The man carrying the logs pretended to be profound and said, "If one person says it's false, then 100 or 1,000 people say it. How can it be false? I have to explain it to you." Not far away, a steward looked over and shouted, "You too, what are you doing? Have you finished moving the logs? Do you want to eat or not? If you don't want to move, there are still others." The man shivered and immediately said, I'm coming. Don't move. Don't touch my logs. If anyone touches my logs, I'll fight them." The passerby was startled for a long time. He looked at a young man passing by and asked, "What he said just now, was it all true?" Li nodded and said, "It's not just that. When Princess Duanrong was born, beautiful stars appeared and auspicious clouds appeared. The Phoenix Cry imperial capital was filled with the emperor's aura. At that time, a wandering Taoist who passed by the imperial palace said that this was the fate of the emperor. A person with this kind of fate would definitely become the emperor in the future. Only when the passerby walked away in a daze did General Fan rub his head and say with some surprise, "When Her Highness was born, I was standing guard at the city gates." At that time, there was no phoenix, nor was there any fragrance. As for those beautiful stars and auspicious clouds, that's even more nonsense. Who was the one who spread those rumors? To dare spread rumors about the princess, I'll skin them alive. Wei Liang, who had just returned, looked at him and finally couldn't help but say, "Old Fan, why don't you stop leading the troops and supervise those people moving the logs? That job is easy and doesn't need to use your brain. It's very suitable for you." The one-eyed general was startled and asked, "What do you mean?" Yang Liuqing blushed a little. Although she knew the purpose of the brothel spreading these rumors, she still felt a little embarrassed in front of so many people. Li Yi looked at her and comforted her, "These are all nothing. In the past, there was a shameless fellow who said that he wasn't human and that he would transform into a dragon when he encountered a storm. Those who achieved great things did not bother with trifles. He didn't say that when she was born, the word Empress was written on her palm. That was already very restrained. To become an emperor, one must first learn to be shameless. She didn't know how shamelessly Xian was as an emperor. He even needed someone to help manage the country. Let's not think about this for now." He looked at Yang Liuqing and said, "After we take down Sangzhou, we'll be busy for a period of time, Sangzhou's capital." The provincial governor of Sangzhou sneezed and rubbed his nose. He asked, "Have you investigated the matter that I asked you to investigate?" Below, a low-ranking official nodded and said, "Reporting to Lord, I've investigated everything. That holy religion is nothing more than a group of self-proclaimed chivalrous people. They help the commoners to suppress bandits and distribute food everywhere. They say that they want to punish the powerful and help the people. In troubled times, there were many chivalrous people who lacked a single thought. It was fine as long as they didn't rebel." The provincial governor of Sangzhou relaxed and said, "I understand. You can leave." This lowly official takes his leave. The low-ranking official bowed and left. The provincial governor of Sangzhou couldn't help but sneeze again. He rubbed his nose and mumbled, "I didn't catch a cold last night." He stood up. For some reason, he had an ominous premonition in his heart. The low-ranking official walked out of the room and into the courtyard. When he brushed past two bailiffs, he raised his hands slightly and extended 3 fingers. Chapter 1085. Early in the morning, the sky was already bright. There weren't many pedestrians on the bumpy and uneven streets of Sangzhou. Sangzhou wasn't a large state to begin with and didn't have a large population. In the past 2 years, because of the increasing bandits and wars, the entire city was half empty. Some people had died, some had fled to other places. The people that remained in Sangzhou were either unable to leave their homeland or had no relatives to go to. Rather than saying they were living in Sangzhou, it was more like they were fighting against the heavens. At a vegetable stall on the side of the street, a woman stopped in her tracks. Carrying a basket, she picked through the vegetables and asked, "How much are you selling these radishes?" The stall owner sat on the stone steps and raised his head. 2 copper coins per caddy." 2 copper coins? The woman in coarse clothing frowned and said, "It was 1 copper coin yesterday." The stall owner glanced at her and lightly said, "Yesterday, the officials only charged 5 copper coins for blocking the road. Today, they're charging 10 copper coins." The price of 1 caddy of radishes had doubled. What should have been a month's expenditure would now be used up in half a month. The woman angrily picked up her basket and said, "I'll look at other vendors." She walked 1 round on the street and when she returned, her expression had completely collapsed. This isn't drinking blood and eating meat. They're smashing their bones and swallowing them. These days are almost unbearable. Who said it wasn't? The vegetable vendor finally sighed and said, "When Sangzhou was occupied by those rebels, the people were the ones who suffered. Now that Sangzhou has been taken back by the government, the people are still the ones who suffer. When will these bitter days come to an end?" The woman thought about it and said, "That might not be bad." 2 years ago, when Princess Duanrong was in Sangzhou, everything was quite good. Sigh, what a pity. The stall owner seemed to have thought of something and suddenly said, I heard 2 days ago that Her Highness is going to fight back. The woman put down her basket and said mysteriously, I also heard that Princess Duanrong has been fated to be an emperor since she was young. Just like the princess of the neighboring Jing kingdom, she will become an empress in the future. The two of them talked mysteriously for a while. The stall owner waved his hand and said, Sister-in-law, I see that you and I get along quite well. This is all fate. How about this? I'll sell this dish to you at the same price as yesterday. That's good. The woman smiled and said, Today, I have to pick a little more. She picked a whole basket of vegetables and handed it to the stall owner, saying, Weigh it. After the stall owner weighed it, he said, That's a total of 22 copper coins. I'll round it up and give you 20 copper coins. The woman took out her pouch, counted the copper coins, and handed them over to him, saying, You count them. The stall owner smiled, kicked the money into his pocket and said, You don't have to count. Are you going to lie to me, sister-in-law? All right then, I'll go back first. The woman waved her hand at him. When the stall owner saw her disappear, he immediately put the money back into his pocket and counted again. It did not matter even if he paid 2 copper coins less, because the price of the vegetables was originally 20 copper coins. He added a small change and wiped off another small change. After counting it twice and looking at the 18 copper coins in his hand, the stall owner fell into deep thought. He sighed. The moral degeneration of the world was getting worse day by day, and people's hearts were no longer what they used to be. The simple and honest customs of Sangzhou had been ruined by these people. At this moment, a man who was walking while tightening his belt walked over and asked, Old Wang, did anyone come to buy vegetables just now? The young stall owner kicked the money into his pocket, stood up, and waved his hand. He said, No, but a sister-in-law came. She took a long time to pick vegetables, but she thought it was too expensive and didn't buy any more. Sigh, I don't want to raise the price either, but if I don't, I'll have to hand all the money for these vegetables to the government. Say, why can't they learn from the past Princess Duanrong? The man sighed, looked at him, and said gratefully, I ate something bad yesterday. Thank you for helping me look after my stall. You're welcome. The young man stood up, waved his hand, and said, It's nothing. After the young man left, the man counted with his fingers and murmured, Today is a good day. He cleaned up the vegetable stall early, returned home, and told his wife and children to look after the house well. He walked out of the house, walked around a few streets, and when he arrived in front of the door of a deep residence, he lightly knocked on the door 3 times, and said in a low voice, Jing Ku assassinates the king of Qin. The door opened, and he walked in, closing it on the way. In the spacious courtyard in front, there were already dozens of people gathered together. Another hour passed, and from time to time, people would come in from outside. At some point, someone counted the number of people. Everyone stood in an orderly manner in the courtyard, and a young man walked out from inside. Everyone bowed and said, Greetings, Envoy Su. No need to be so polite. The young man waved his hand, and said, I won't say much nonsense. The guards outside the city are obstructing us. Tonight, our mission is to attack the provincial governor's manor. Our people are already prepared inside the provincial governor's manor. You must remember, we are different from those rebels. After attacking the provincial governor's manor, you are not allowed to rob or kill. If there is a violation, you will be punished according to the sect rules. Yes. Everyone answered in unison. In the provincial governor's manor, for some reason, the Sangzhou provincial governor kept feeling uneasy tonight. The sky had already darkened. He walked out of the hall and into the courtyard, pacing back and forth anxiously. A figure walked into the courtyard from outside and walked to his side, asking with concern, Darren, what's wrong? The Sangzhou provincial governor looked at the advisor beside him and asked, Is there still no news of Princess Duanrong? These days, he had not paid attention to the rumors regarding Princess Duanrong in Sangzhou city. However, the rumors had spread like wildfire, and the entire city was in an uproar. He finally started to feel uneasy. When the advisor heard this, he smiled and said, Darren is worrying too much. These things are just the product of those ignorant people's groundless accusations and extreme exaggerations. Could it be that Darren also thinks that Princess Duanrong can become the emperor? When the Tsangzhou provincial governor heard this, he felt slightly more at ease. He thought and then said, there are no waves without wind. The groundless accusations also have their roots. We cannot let down our guard. Have the city guard strengthen the defenses these days? The advisor nodded and said, yes, I'll go make the arrangements now. Also, send people to put up Princess Duanrong's portrait. Put up more outside the provincial city as well. Anyone who discovers any clues will be rewarded with 1,000 taels of silver. Understood. The Tsangzhou provincial governor waved his hand and said, all right, go make the arrangements. Seeing the advisor leave, he stroked his beard. He did not want to stay in a place like Tsangzhou for another moment. If he could capture Princess Duanrong, what awaited him would be a bright future. The advisor walked out of the courtyard and brought 2 bailiffs to the gates of the provincial governor's manor. He said to the people guarding the gates, the provincial governor has orders to step up the patrols these few days. There are not enough people in the city defense. You guys should go as well. Leave this place to the 2 of them. The people did not suspect anything. After respectfully replying, they immediately left. At the same time, the Tsangzhou provincial governor returned to the hall. When he saw the sudden appearance of a few people, his footsteps paused. A young lady at the very front looked at him and asked, you were looking for me? After being startled for a moment, the Tsangzhou provincial governor's expression changed drastically. He immediately turned and left the hall. At this moment, the provincial governor's manor was already in chaos. Outside the city, flames soared into the sky, and there were faint sounds like thunder. Chapter 1086. The Tsangzhou provincial governor stood in the courtyard. When he saw several figures walking out of the hall, his legs went soft, and he collapsed to the ground. General Wei, General Chen, Duke, Princess, he finally realized where that ominous premonition in his heart these past few days came from. They fought back again. The provincial governor's manor was already in chaos. Those rebels rushed in. No, they didn't seem like rebels. They were organized and disciplined. They didn't smash or rob. They only controlled the bailiffs and officials of the provincial governor's manor. There were only several dozen bailiffs in the provincial governor's manor. In front of these several hundred people, they didn't have the slightest ability to resist. Very soon, the noisy provincial governor's manor calmed down. A long time had passed, but there was still no movement from the 2,000 soldiers responsible for the security of the provincial governor's manor. The Tsangzhou provincial governor raised his head and looked outside. The place where the flames were soaring into the sky was the direction of the barracks. The only explanation was that when the provincial governor's manor was attacked, they were also attacked, and they couldn't even protect themselves. That deafening thunder and flames made him involuntarily recall the tragic scene of corpses strewn all over the Thorns Ridge that night. His entire body trembled like a sieve. Everyone in the provincial governor's manor gathered in one place. Chen Qing walked over and waved his hand, saying, "Take them away first." Attacking the provincial governor's manor was not difficult at all. The people guarding the gates were their own people, and they had long since familiarized themselves with the terrain and defenses inside. The strong citizens lying in ambush around the provincial governor's manor could catch them off guard in an instant. Wei Liang walked to the entrance of the manor and asked in a loud voice, "How is the situation outside the city?" In the distance, General Fan laughed heartily as he dismounted from his horse and said, "There's heavenly punishment, divine weapons, and 2 captains on our side. Furthermore, there's a surprise attack, working together from the inside and outside. If we still can't win this kind of battle, old Fan, we'll cut off my own head and let you sit on it." He strode in front of Yang Liuqing, knelt on one knee, and said loudly, "Reporting to your highness, I have captured all of Tsangzhou's 2,000 soldiers. Our side has suffered 23 casualties, no serious injuries, and no deaths. In a battle of this level, it was already a miracle that only 20 or so people were lightly injured. However, considering the circumstances of the ambush, the difference in equipment, and the fact that 2 of the 4 lieutenants had defected, the first thing they did when they attacked was to take down the general and the other 2 lieutenants. As a result, the Tsangzhou garrison had no one to command them and was in a mess. This result was nothing to brag about. The thunder and fire outside the city had long since stopped, but within Tsangzhou city, almost no one was sleeping. Be it the commoners or the gentry, all of them had closed their doors. Through the cracks of their doors, they looked at the troops hurrying through the streets. Their faces were filled with worry and panic. They had been rooted in Tsangzhou for many years. How could they not know what this represented? They had seen this scene too many times. Someone had broken through the city gates and occupied the provincial governor's office. Tsangzhou was going to change again. After daybreak tomorrow, this Tsangzhou would no longer be the Tsangzhou of today. They didn't know who had broken through the city, and they didn't know how those people would treat the commoners in Tsangzhou city. They didn't even know what their future would be, but there was one thing that was beyond doubt. Tonight, no one in Tsangzhou city would be able to sleep peacefully. Wei Liang, Chen Qing, Fan Xiao and the others also didn't sleep for the entire night. They were busy dealing with the aftermath and harvesting the fruits of victory. Once they completely took over Tsangzhou, there were even more things that needed to be done. Governing Tsangzhou, expanding the troops, repairing the city walls, defending against enemies that could appear at any time. Taking over Tsangzhou city was only the first small step of their great undertaking. The sky had just brightened when some commoners who hadn't slept for the entire night saw through the cracks of their doors that some people were putting up something on the streets. What made them curious was that among these people, there were actually people that they knew from the streets. Seeing these people walking back and forth, someone finally couldn't bear it anymore and opened a small crack in the door of his house. He shouted at the person who was putting up a notice at the end of the street, "Hey, Zhang Depeo, what are you doing? You still dare to go out at this time? Do you want to die?" A man pasted the notice at the end of the street and then jumped up and patted it with all his might. After patting it firmly, he turned his head and looked at the man. He said in astonishment, "Why do I want to die? I'm just putting up a notice. It's not like I'm blocking anyone or hindering anyone. It's not illegal. What notice are you putting up?" The man opened the door wider and asked doubtfully, "Aren't you afraid that the people who entered the city yesterday would capture you? Last night, I saw from the window that they even captured the provincial governor." The man called Zhang Depeo grinned and said, "Capture me? Hee, you don't know who was the one who tied the rope on the provincial governor's body yesterday." The man opened the door wider and asked doubtfully, "What does this have to do with you? Could it be that you were the one who tied the rope?" "To tell you the truth, the rope on the provincial governor's body yesterday was tied by a brother beside me." Zhang Depeo said with some regret, "Sigh, if I wasn't busy tying up another dog official yesterday, this good thing would have fallen on my head." "What do you mean?" The man walked out of the house and looked at Zhang Depeo. He asked in astonishment, "Could it be that you also participated in the rebellion? Who was the one who fought their way in last night?" "What rebellion?" Zhang Depeo waved his hand and said unhappily, "Let me tell you, the one who rebelled was the current dog emperor. He killed my father and big brother. We followed Her Highness to quell the rebellion." "If you don't know anything, don't talk nonsense." "What did you say?" The man was stunned and asked, "You said that the one who fought their way in last night was Her Highness? Princess Duanrong is back?" Zhang Depeo nodded and said, "That's right. Otherwise, why would I put up this thing early in the morning when I had nothing to do?" The man looked at the notice and asked, "What does it say?" "I don't know what it says." Zhang Depeo scratched his head and said, "But I heard that Her Highness wants to recruit people to repair the city walls. Meals will be provided and money will be provided. If they follow Her Highness to quell the rebellion, participate in the revolution, and make contributions, they will be given land when they return." While the man was stunned, Zhang Depeo stuffed a stack of notices into his hands and said, "Don't just stand there. If you have nothing to do, help me put up these. I'll treat you to lunch at noon." At this moment, in the streets and alleys of Tsangzhou City, someone held a large paper tube in his hand and walked through the streets, shouting all the way. Recruiting, recruiting. Repairing the city walls at the south gate. 10 copper coins a day. Wages will be paid daily. 2 meals will be provided. Those who are interested can go to the government office to sign up. The number of people is limited. First come, first served, recruiting, recruiting, Her Highness is recruiting. Join the army today, get your pay tomorrow, and you will be given land in the future. The commoners hid in their homes. They couldn't see the notice, but they could understand the human language. They were shocked. The one who fought their way into the city last night was Princess Duanrong? Her Highness was back. Everyone said that the person with the mandate of heaven was coming. Could it be Her Highness? Yes, it must be. When Princess Duanrong was born, she was protected by a phoenix. Even the stars in the sky said that she didn't have an ordinary life. She was blessed by God. Wasn't this the person with the mandate of heaven? They didn't believe in the government or anyone else, but they believed in the princess. They prayed to the stars and the moon every day, hoping for this day. They hoped that Her Highness would come back to save them. An old man pushed open the door and walked to the street. He stopped a soldier who was holding a paper tube and asked with a trembling voice, "Is Her Highness back?" The soldier nodded. The old man sat on the ground and cried, "Her Highness is back. We've been waiting for Her Highness to come back." More and more commoners walked out of their homes and onto the streets. They looked at the notices in the city and looked at each other in confirmation. The whole city was in an uproar at this moment. The whole city was jubilant. Her Highness is back. Her Highness is finally back. Our bitter days are coming to an end. It turns out that Her Highness is the person with the mandate of heaven. It turns out that the person with the mandate of heaven is Her Highness. I want to join the army. I want to follow Her Highness to conquer the world. Even God said that Her Highness is the life of an emperor. She will definitely succeed. I still have an old mother at home. I can't follow Her Highness. I plan to sign up to build the city wall and make the wall thicker so that no one can break in. Overnight, the Tsangzhou provincial governor's mansion had been changed into the Princess Mansion, which was also the temporary command center of the Revolutionary Army. In front of the Princess Mansion, the commoners of Tsangzhou gathered. An old lady with a hunched body carried a basket and said, "Sir, I'm not going to see Her Highness." This old lady doesn't dare to disturb Her Highness. This basket of eggs was laid by the old hen at home. Please help me to bring them in. This old lady has no strength to build the city wall or fight. This is a small gift for the soldiers to nourish their bodies. A strong man carried half a bag of pork on his back and put it on the steps of the door. He said, "This meat is for the soldiers. I won't sell meat in the future. I will join the army tomorrow. These few bolts of cloth are for the soldiers to make clothes. These 2 fishes were just caught yesterday. I can't take out anything else. This is a small gift." The crowd consciously moved forward bit by bit. People said 1 or 2 words, or simply said nothing. They put down the things and turned to leave. The people's hearts and destiny. Lee and Mississippi Lou sat side by side on the roof. He patted her thigh and pointed to the crowd below. He sighed and said, "Do you see? This is the real person with the mandate of heaven." Chapter 1087. The status of Yang Liuqing in the hearts of the Tsangzhou people was far beyond Li Yi's expectations. If the current emperor of the Wu kingdom could achieve such a status in the hearts of the people, then the rebels of the Wu kingdom could be easily wiped out without much effort. This, of course, had something to do with the policy of being close to the people during her 2 years in Tsangzhou. Even without the rumors spread by the brothels, the people of Tsangzhou were still hoping that she would return as soon as possible. This would save them a lot of trouble. News had already spread from the various government offices in Tsangzhou. Within Tsangzhou city alone, the people who volunteered to enlist had formed a long queue in front of the 3 government offices. If they held hands, they could probably circle the entire city. Part of the reason was that they could get a tael of silver immediately after enlisting, but another important reason was their trust and support for Yangliuking. The number of people who applied to build the city walls was also innumerable. As the base of the rear, the city walls of Tsangzhou had to be especially sturdy. Apart from that, the structure had to be greatly modified to adapt to the new tactics. This project was urgent. The news of the change of ownership of Tsangzhou would soon spread. It wouldn't take long for the imperial court of the Wu Kingdom to formulate a strategy and send troops to clear out the city. They needed to build this place into an impregnable fortress before the enemy arrived. Li Yi was initially worried that they wouldn't have enough manpower to deal with certain situations, so he wanted to transfer some people from Rui City over. Now, it seemed that there was no need for that at all. In a short period of time, their troops would be able to expand by more than 10 times. With the support of the fringe, they wouldn't lack food, manpower, or divine punishment. Soon, they wouldn't even lack Italian cannons. Even if there were 100,000 soldiers outside, they would be able to wear them down even if they couldn't defeat them. Li Yi looked at the increasing crowd below and sighed. Your disciple is very powerful. I know my disciple is very powerful. Mississippi Lu looked at him and shifted her gaze to his hand. What does this have to do with you putting your hand on my leg? Li Yi couldn't say that he was afraid of heights. When Mississippi Lu brought him up, she didn't consider his opinion. If he didn't grab something with his hand, he wouldn't feel at ease. The officials didn't want to change and didn't care about governance. They only wanted to squeeze the last drop of blood from the people. The Wu Kingdom's imperial court had long lost its credibility in Tsangzhou. This made it especially smooth when Yangliuking took over Tsangzhou. The people lined the streets to welcome them and were extremely cooperative with their work in Tsangzhou. If the citizens of the other prefectures and prefectures of the Wu country were to cooperate as well, then his precious martial nephew would only need to raise his voice and the emperor of the Wu country would only be able to stay in the imperial palace. He might even be killed in his sleep by some eunuch or palace maid. Of course, revolution couldn't be imagined. It had to be done step by step and be down to earth. Li Yi put his hands behind his head and lay down. Looking at the rare blue sky in winter, he suddenly asked, Rui, after we defeat the imperial court of the Wu Kingdom and Yangliuking becomes the empress, what are your plans? Mississippi Lu had already realized her dream of becoming the king of bandits. Even her disciple was about to realize her dream of becoming a king. The only two things in life that hadn't been fulfilled was that as a martial artist, she hadn't become a martial arts master yet. As a woman, she hadn't found the man she could rely on for the rest of her life. The former was an illusory realm that could only be encountered and not sought. It could only be left to fate. The latter couldn't be forced, couldn't be found, couldn't be begged. Although it couldn't be forced, there was an old saying that said, I've been looking for him in the crowd for thousands of times, but when I suddenly look back, he's in the dim light. It made some sense. Mississippi Lu thought for a while and lay down beside him. She said, in this world, there are still many places that I haven't been to. Maybe I'll go for a walk alone, wearing fresh clothes and riding a horse, holding a sword. Since the Lantern Festival that year, Mississippi Lu's literacy level had soared at a terrifying speed. She didn't know many words, but now she could casually recite poems and idioms, sometimes quoting from the classics. Even he had to think about it to understand. Now, she was wearing fresh clothes and riding a horse, holding a sword, and seemed to be changing into a literary heroine. Mississippi Lu looked up at the sky and said, What about you? Are you going to get to know another princess of the Qi Kingdom? Why would I get to know a princess of the Qi Kingdom? Li Yi glanced at her and said, When things here are over, I'll go back to the capital, and then what? And then. That's not the point. Where were we just now? How can you travel alone with a sword? Jianghu is dangerous, and it's too dangerous for a girl to travel alone. On the roof, Li Yi and Rui were talking about life, dreams, and romantic things. In the conference room, Yangliuking was already discussing the next step of the plan with the higher-ups in the army. Prime Minister Wang stood up and walked to a small board. He said, Now that we've taken over Tsangzhou and purged most of the bandits in the city, the conflict between the people, the government, and the bandits has been eliminated. However, for the people, the most important thing is land, the means of production, and the conflict with the rich and powerful landowners. Jiang of Sila's suggestion is that we can't kill them all at once. We should attack some of them and draw some of them to our side. After the old man with the surname Wang finished, Wei Liang stood up and walked to a huge map. He pointed at the area around Cangzhou and said, "These 5 provinces are very close to Cangzhou. Among them, Nanzhou is an important military town with more than 10,000 soldiers. The other 4 provinces can also gather nearly 10,000 soldiers. In other words, when the news from Cangzhou reaches the imperial court, we may be surrounded and attacked by 20,000 soldiers. A revolution can't be built in one place. We have to defend Cangzhou, but we also need to expand the war as soon as possible. We need to unite all the rebel forces in these 5 provinces and create even more chaos. The news from Cangzhou will soon reach the imperial capital. We don't have much time left." November of the 4th year of Wu Yuan. Everyone in Cangzhou was a soldier. Her Highness had entered Cangzhou half a month ago. Although most of the people had been waiting for this for a long time, there was no doubt that the imperial court would not ignore this. They would soon face the imperial court's purge. Before this, they needed to build the city walls even thicker, taller, and sturdier. Only then would they be able to stop the incoming enemies. The notice personally written by the former prime minister had already spread throughout Cangzhou. The current emperor had killed his brother and father, ignoring the will of the heavens. He had already lost the virtue of an emperor. He had also caused the entire Wu kingdom to fall apart, and rebels were rising everywhere. He was no longer fit to be an emperor. At this time, the emperor's star had fallen, and the celestial phenomenon had given a warning. Princess Duanrong had followed the will of the previous emperor and raised troops to suppress the rebels. This notice had been pasted throughout the streets and alleys of Cangzhou within half a day. It was also spread by storytellers in the brothels and gradually spread to even further places. In the great hall within the palace walls of the imperial capital of the Wu kingdom. Pa! The martial emperor's face was ashen. In front of the hundreds of officials in the imperial court, he suddenly threw down a memorial. The notice contained within the memorial landed next to the feet of an official. "I really have a good sister. Pass down my order. Order the governor of Nan province to be the great general of white cavalry. He will lead the troops guarding the 5 provinces and immediately set out to recapture Cangzhou." He looked down with a sinister gaze and gritted his teeth. At all costs. Chapter 1088. Stop the rebellion in Cangzhou at all costs, dead or alive. The court was silent. All the civil and military officials lowered their heads in silence. Only the martial emperor's angry voice echoed. It wasn't until the court was over and the officials walked out of the main hall and the palace gates that the oppressive atmosphere showed signs of dissipating. An official caught up with a general in front and asked in a low voice, "General Cheng, what's going on? Didn't King Jing die a long time ago? What's going on with the rebellion in Cangzhou? If you have any questions, you can ask His Majesty personally. I still have important matters to attend to, so I'll take my leave first." The general cupped his hands casually and strode away. The official looked at his back and shook his head helplessly. Princess Duanrong and King Jing had always been thorns in His Majesty's heart. Other than confidants like General Cheng, who dared to mention them in front of His Majesty. No matter how many people in the Wu kingdom rebelled and proclaimed themselves as kings, they were still rebels. However, Princess Duanrong and King Jing were different. They were of the same origin as His Majesty and were both legitimate members of the Wu kingdom. Justice stood on their side. His Majesty was afraid. After 2 years, Princess Duanrong had made a comeback. Cangzhou was suddenly seized, and Prime Minister Wang had personally written the surrender document, which revealed almost all his evil deeds to the public. The document had even reached the imperial capital. Before long, all the people in the Wu kingdom would know that their emperor had killed his brother and father and slaughtered his entire clan. He was heartless and could not be tolerated by the heavens. He would be punished by both humans and gods. His Majesty no longer pretended to be close to his brother and was secretive like before. In front of all the civil and military officials, he gave the order to stop at all costs, dead or alive. He wanted to use power and force to shut everyone's mouths. Among the officials who dispersed, some looked calm, some looked confused, and some looked worried. In the rear hall of the palace, the martial emperor stood in the hall and looked at a eunuch. He said, "Add Yang Fu's reward to her as well. In addition, add another 100,000 taels of silver. Tell those so-called chivalrous martial artists that anyone who can take Princess Duanrong's head will be rewarded 300,000 taels of silver." The eunuch bowed and said, "Yes, Your Majesty." "Great ancestor. Great ancestor, great ancestor, you can't go in." Boom. Suddenly, a chaotic sound came from outside the hall, and then the hall door shattered with a loud bang. "Yang Zhe, I shouldn't have let you live in this world from the very beginning." The old man with white hair and beard walked in from outside. He looked at the martial monarch and spoke with a cold and murderous voice. "Imperial uncle." The martial emperor looked at him, smiled, and said, "Of the men of the Yang dynasty, only you and I are left. What does it matter if another insignificant woman dies? Since that's the case, this old man will send you to see your father and brother." A voice that sounded like tearing silk came from within the hall. The white-haired old man disappeared from where he stood, and when he reappeared, he was already in front of the martial emperor. He formed a claw with his fingers and fiercely grabbed at the martial emperor's throat. His speed was extremely fast, and the eunuch beside the martial emperor was sent flying. The martial emperor felt as if he had been locked onto by a powerful aura, and a burning pain came from his throat. Death had never been so close to him. A trace of fear appeared in his eyes, as well as a trace of anxiety. Bang! After a muffled sound, the martial emperor took a few steps back and fell to the ground, gasping for breath. A silhouette appeared where he had been standing a moment ago. It was an old woman with a head full of white hair, but there were not many wrinkles on her face. She reached out a hand and grabbed the white-haired old man's wrist. When the martial emperor saw that the old man was stopped, he panted and laughed at the same time. His laughter grew louder and louder. "Imperial, Imperial uncle. Aren't you a master? Aren't you invincible? Kill me, I'm right here, come over." The old man's expression finally changed when his wrist was grabbed. "Grandmaster," this old woman was also a grandmaster. He looked at her and asked with a frown, "Who are you? Why are you interfering in the affairs of the imperial family?" The old woman's expression was calm. She let go of his hand and said calmly, "He still owes me one thing. You can't kill him." The old man's expression became calm. He did not know where Yang Zhe had found this master, nor did he want to know. He looked at her and said, "If that's the case, then let's see if you have the ability to do so." As soon as he finished speaking, his body flickered and went straight for the martial emperor behind the old woman. Bang! Another muffled sound came from within the hall. The old woman's figure was even faster than him. She appeared in front of the martial emperor and blocked his path once again. The smile on the martial emperor's face became even wider, and he said mockingly, "Imperial uncle, if you don't hurry over, I'm afraid you can only collect the corpse of your most beloved Princess Duanrong." The white-haired old man stood where he was, but he no longer attacked. Instead, he looked at the old woman with a bewildered and uncertain gaze and asked, pursuing shadow, "Who are you to Su Tian? You know Su Tian?" The old woman's expression changed for the first time. Her voice suddenly rose, and it even sounded a little sharp. This pursuing shadow movement technique was created by that old man when he was young, and it was also the thing that he was most proud of. He often bragged about it, and he treated it like a treasure. Back then, he didn't even teach this movement technique to me. The white-haired old man looked at him and said in a slightly slow tone, "He actually passed this movement technique to you. Could it be that you're a disciple that he took later on?" The old woman didn't answer him. After the initial excitement, her emotions had already calmed down, and she asked, "Are you very familiar with Su Tian?" The white-haired old man said, "When we were young, we could be considered to be close friends." The old woman's gaze was blank as she muttered, "Close friends?" Back then, the two of us were only a step away from becoming a grandmaster. We made a bet on who would be the first to break through that barrier. When the white-haired old man recalled the past, he didn't notice the resentment and jealousy in the old woman's voice at all. He was still talking non-stop. "Back then, my cultivation level was even higher than his." He was indignant in his heart, and in order to win against me, he cut off all distracting thoughts, abandoned everything, and went into closed-door training for several years. The old woman closed her eyes and muttered, "In order to win against you, he cut off all distracting thoughts, abandoned everything, and went into closed-door training for several years." She deliberately emphasized the words cut off and abandon. The old man nodded, and then asked doubtfully, "Since you're his disciple, did he never mention me to you?" As soon as he finished speaking, his expression suddenly changed. He raised an arm, clenched his other hand into a fist, and suddenly punched forward. Bang! His body flew backward, and a trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He glared angrily at the old woman, who also spat out blood, and said angrily, "Are you crazy?" The old woman didn't speak, and what responded to him was an attack that was even fiercer than before. "Crazy woman, crazy woman. Stop, if this goes on, both of us will only suffer. Stop, I know Su Tian, I know Su Tian." Ever since he arrived at the Wu Kingdom, Su was often in a daze, as if he was immersed in some kind of memory. He didn't say anything, and Li Yi was too embarrassed to ask. He had been sitting there alone for a long time, and the meat on the drumstick had been eaten clean by him. Even the bones were full of teeth marks. A black dog had been squatting not far away from him since he took the drumstick. The dog's eyes were wide open, and it looked at him without blinking. The dog's eyes were originally full of hope, but now they were close to despair. When Feng walked in from outside, Li Yi finally couldn't help but say, "Go to the kitchen and tell them to add another drumstick for Su later." "I'll add the drumstick later." Feng shook his head and handed a letter to Li Yi, saying, "Young master, you should take a look at this first." Li Yi opened the letter, and after reading it, he shook his head slightly. 300,000 taels of silver to buy the life of his beloved martial nephew. This was the most stingy emperor he had ever seen. Mississippi Lu's disciple, his martial nephew of the Jiang of Silla, was only worth 300,000 taels of silver? He thought for a moment, looked at Feng, and said, "Inform Lu Luo to send out hero posters, offering a reward of 1 million taels of silver for the head of the emperor of the Wu Kingdom, and 10 divine weapons that could cut through hair as if they were mud. They are accepting custom orders, and free shipping is included. In addition, 10,000 points on the hero ranking list will be rewarded. You can also customize a novel with the theme of martial arts heroes based on the hero himself, and the novel will be spread in the brothel." Chapter 1089. In the past 2 months, Nanzhou, Linzhou, Yunzhou. These 5 states have been mobilizing their troops frequently. Our spies have reported that the military governor of Nanzhou has been temporarily appointed as the great general of cavalry. They want to gather the troops of the 5 states and take down Sangzhou in one fell swoop. Wei Liang stood in front of a huge sand table. He had planted 5 flags around a sand dune with the word Sangzhou written on it. He pointed at the flag in the middle and drew a line with a tree branch. He said, "These 5 states have about 20,000 troops that can be mobilized at the moment. They have been secretly mobilizing for 2 months. In half a month at most, they will directly attack Sangzhou." Li Yi stood outside the door and listened to the analysis of the battle situation for a while. He wasn't surprised and walked away slowly. He had thought that the imperial court's counterattack would be swift and fierce. Who would have thought that after he went back for the new year, 2 to 3 months had passed. He had already brought Rui and the others to Sangzhou for a vacation, and the other party was still mobilizing their troops. Let them do it. There was no hurry. There were more than 20,000 people. As long as this number didn't increase tenfold, Sangzhou would be fine. After they took down Sangzhou a few months ago, they had recruited many citizens. Now, their troops had expanded to more than 10,000 people. During this time, Wei Liang and the others had distributed some experienced soldiers to train the new recruits. When Li Yi returned to the army camp after 2 months, the army looked completely different. The joint attack of the 5 states this time was the determination of the imperial court of the Wu kingdom. To them, it was an opportunity that they had been waiting for a long time. Su Zheng had already brought people to those states before the new year. Due to the heavily guarded armies in those states, there hadn't been any big movements. They could only develop in secret. Mississippi Lu had also brought people to subdue a few rebel forces and had long since set her eyes on the state capital. Everything was ready. They were just waiting for them to attack. It wasn't that everything was ready. They still lacked a few scripts. The new drama, The Legend of the Assassin, that had been released in the Wu Kingdom was about to end. In a tea house outside the state capital of a certain state in the Wu Kingdom. There is a saying in the history books, Zhuanzhu's assassination of Wang Liao was like a comet striking the moon, Nie Zheng's assassination of Han Xiao was like a white rainbow piercing the sun, Yao Li's assassination of Qing Ji was like a hawk striking the palace. In the shabby tea house, an old man with a grizzled beard sat at the very front. His voice rose and fell in cadence. In ancient times, some powerful assassins would even be warned by celestial phenomena when they took action. According to legend, when Zhuanzhu assassinated King Liao of Wu, the tail of a comet swept across the moon. When Nie Zheng assassinated Hanan, a white light shot straight up to the sun. When Yao Li assassinated Qing Ji, a goshawk swooped down on the palace. These 3 are the 3 great assassins we'll be talking about today. Although the tea house wasn't overcrowded, there were no empty seats. There were ordinary people taking a break in the tea house, as well as travel-worn swordsmen holding swords and knives. However, most of them were Jianghu people carrying weapons. They were all attracted by the old man's story. When he heard something happy, he would take out a copper coin from his pocket and place it in a broken bowl in front of the old man. The Jianghu and the court seemed to be very far apart, but they were actually very closely related. What happened in the court was closely related to the Jianghu. Once the court collapsed, the Jianghu people wouldn't be able to stand alone. The Wu Kingdom revered martial arts. Whether it was the poor, the gentry, or even the powerful royal family, although they didn't value martial arts more than literature, their rejection and contempt for martial arts were far inferior to other countries. When the country was stable, there were still wanderers who killed people on the streets. Now that the country was in chaos, the Jianghu, which was already not clear, became even more muddy. The so-called chivalrous people relied on their martial arts to despise the law and viewed human life as nothing more than grass. They hired assassins to kill, offered rewards for assassinations. They couldn't stop despite being banned. Because of their martial arts, they were naturally very interested in the stories of the Jianghu. These days, the heroic stories that circulated in the brothels and small storytelling houses in the various provinces were very popular in the Jianghu. What the old man was talking about was the biography of the assassins. It recorded dozens of assassin stories from ancient to modern times. They weren't just simple stories about chivalrous people in the Jianghu. Some of them involved brotherhood, love between men and women, and there was no lack of chivalrous people who served their country and its people. At the same time, there was also a list of assassins in the Jianghu. The list recorded the famous assassins in the Wu Kingdom. Behind them, there was a detailed list of the person's life story and the reason why they were on the list. These things had been circulating in the Jianghu in the past in the Wu Kingdom, but no one had ever organized these things together and made such a ranking. There were 10 positions on the list, and there were only 9 assassins. No one knew who made this list, but there was a sentence that almost everyone knew. There were only 10 positions on the list, and only these 10 people could be called assassins. Those who couldn't even get on the list weren't assassins, but trash. The reason why there were only 9 assassins on the list was because the top position of the list was empty. There was only a short line of a poem. Guests of Zhao wear tassels, bright as the frost and snow of the Wu Hook. The silver saddle shines on the white horse, galloping like a shooting star. Kill a man in 10 steps, unstoppable for 1,000 miles. When the matter is done, leave with a brush of the robe, hiding your identity and name. This was a poem that described chivalrous people. It was said that in ancient times, there were many chivalrous people in the land of Yen and Zhao. What this poem described was the charm of the chivalrous people in the land of Yen and Zhao. The hat was decorated with tassels, and the sword was as bright as the frost and snow of the Wu Hook. The silver saddle and the white horse reflected each other, galloping like a shooting star. Within 10 steps, kill a man, 1,000 miles pass, unstoppable. When the matter is done, leave with a brush of the robe, leaving no trace, hiding your identity and name. This poem described a chivalrous person or an assassin to the peak. Kill a man in 10 steps, unstoppable for 1,000 miles. When the matter is done, leave with a brush of the robe, hiding your identity and name. This was what an assassin should be, an assassin with the highest realm. According to the person who created the assassin ranking, this poem had been written for the top of the assassin ranking. It had always been waiting for someone to ascend to that position, someone worthy of these few lines of poetry. As the old man narrated, many people in the tea house showed expressions of excitement. The top of the assassin list, for a chivalrous person or an assassin, was almost the greatest glory. In the corner, there were 2 people talking in low voices. It is said that Princess Duanrong's bounty has increased by another 50,000, a total of 350,000 taels of silver. If we can succeed, we should be qualified to be the top of the assassin list, right? There has never been such a high bounty. If we can't even do this, who else is qualified? Who knows how many people have gathered in Sangzhou, and they all have the same goal as us. It is easier said than done to succeed. As the 2 people talked in low voices, a sneer suddenly came from beside them. What the 2 of you are talking about is old news. A man with a knife at the next table turned to look at them and said, on the bounty list, the highest bounty is 1,000,000 taels of silver and 10 divine weapons. To be favored by a storyteller, to help you become famous, to receive guidance from a grandmaster, and to be able to ascend to the top of the assassin list in one go. You 2 must not pay attention to current affairs, right? In the corner, someone was startled and said with a smile, brother, I'm afraid you're dreaming. 1,000,000 taels of silver, 10 divine weapons, and guidance from a grandmaster. Whose head is worth so much silver? You must have met a swindler, right? The other person nodded and said, everyone knows that this bounty on Princess Duanrong was actually inspired by the current emperor. Could it be that in this Wu kingdom, there is someone more wealthy and trustworthy than the emperor? Hearing this, the man smiled and said, if the current emperor is trustworthy, then those traitors who were recruited by the imperial court to ambush Princess Duanrong would not have disappeared from the imperial capital. Hearing this, the 2 people were startled and asked, then do you have proof of what you said? That 1,000,000 taels of silver and 10 divine weapons has already been verified by 10 legendary figures of the martial world. Go out and ask around, and you will know. The 2 people still did not believe it, and asked suspiciously, in this world, whose head is so valuable? The man stretched out a finger and pointed to the sky. The 2 people were startled again, and then their expressions changed at the same time. One of them had a terrified expression and asked, who has eaten the heart of a bear and the heart of a leopard to dare to assassinate the emperor? Let's stop here for today. In front, the old man tidied up the stall and said, tomorrow, we will talk about Jingku assassinating the king of Qin. He waved his hand and said, same old time, same old place. We will not leave until we see each other. Chapter 1090. The Jianghu of the Wu Kingdom was a Jianghu without many restrictions. Ever since the collapse of the country, even the last bit of restrictions had disappeared. Here, human lives were like grass. Whether it was the lives of ordinary people, high officials, or even the lives of princesses and princes, they could all be clearly priced. However, this was the first time they had heard of a bounty for the emperor's head. 1,000,000 taels of silver, 10 divine weapons, guidance from a grandmaster, fame in the brothel. Apart from pursuing martial arts, what people who practiced martial arts wanted was fame and fortune. This assassination mission almost satisfied all of their desires. There were countless people in the Wu Kingdom who wanted to rebel and kill the emperor, but this was worlds apart from putting the emperor's head on a bounty list with a clear price. Come to think of it, assassinating an emperor was much more difficult than assassinating a princess, and it was easier to become famous. None of the famous assassins in history had become famous by assassinating a princess. Regardless of whether there was such a bold assassin, the fact that he dared to accept this mission and put a bounty on the emperor's head was a pioneering act that was rarely seen in the Jianghu for hundreds of years. It was widely spread throughout the entire Wu Kingdom. With such a generous bounty and conditions, there were naturally many people who were tempted. However, the emperor had lived in the depths of the palace for a long time, and there were countless guards around him. There were many experts in the palace. Without the strength of a grandmaster, it was easier said than done to sneak into the palace and assassinate him. Unless there was a way for him to walk out of the depths of the palace and out of the imperial capital. In the imperial capital, the officials had just left the court, and they were still digesting the news they had just heard. Just now, the emperor had announced in front of the officials that he would personally lead the army to quell the many rebellions in the country. This news was very sudden. Although the emperor personally leading the army could greatly increase morale, it would also bring greater problems. They could understand the emperor's eagerness. In order to sit on the throne, he had killed his brothers, his father, and his own people. Under the throne, there were mountains of corpses and seas of blood. The people did not accept him and did not recognize him as the emperor. He needed to do some things to stabilize his position. There was nothing better than personally leading the army to quell rebellions and stabilize the situation in the country to establish his prestige as the emperor. Not to mention how to guarantee His Majesty's safety, just the amount of supplies and fodder that had to be prepared in the early stage would deplete the national treasury's savings. If they were conscripted from all over the country, it would definitely increase the burden on the local government, which would increase the burden on the common people. The common people would not be able to survive and could only revolt. If one rebellion was wiped out, there would probably be 10 more. This was a conflict that could not be resolved. However, it was difficult to disobey the emperor's orders. His Majesty made arbitrary decisions. In the past, there were ministers in the censorate who remonstrated to the death. After they really died, the censorate of the Wu Kingdom only existed in name. None of the civil and military officials dared to disobey his orders. In the rear hall. Your Majesty is wise and mighty, and you command the army like a god. If those traitors knew that Your Majesty was going to lead the army personally, they would have surrendered long ago. There would be no need to waste so much effort. The martial emperor waved his hand, interrupting the flattery of a eunuch, and asked, "Is there any result to the matter I asked you to look into?" "Your Majesty, there is news." The eunuch hurriedly said, "Ever since that day, the old ancestor has not returned to the imperial capital, and that senior has also disappeared. Many people have seen the scene of the two of them fighting outside the imperial capital. He's actually not dead yet?" A trace of disappointment appeared on the martial emperor's face, and then he waved his hand and said, "Pass down the order. The things that I need to personally go to the imperial household department, prepare them as soon as possible." "Yes, Your Majesty," the eunuch bowed and replied. Before he could retreat, another eunuch ran in panic and said in panic, Your Majesty, Your Majesty." The martial emperor frowned and asked, "Why are you so flustered?" The eunuch knelt on the ground, trembling as he handed over a letter, and said, This is the news that reached the imperial capital today." The martial emperor stretched out his hand to take it, tore open the envelope, and looked at it. Not long after, his face became completely gloomy. He tore the letter into pieces and said angrily, Treacherous, treacherous, who issued this bounty, who did it?" He was so angry that his entire body was trembling, and he roared, Investigate, investigate this thoroughly. If I really want to hack this person into pieces, I will execute his entire family." The dignified monarch of a country was actually placed on the bounty list, and his head was worth 1,000,000 taels of silver, and 10 pieces of scrap metal. This was a humiliation that he would never be able to wash away in his lifetime. The eunuch trembled and said, "Your Majesty, I've already investigated. That person did not leave his name, nor did he leave any clues. Trash, trash, what use do I have for trash like you?" The martial emperor waved his hand and said, men, drag him out." The eunuch's face was pale as he knelt on the ground, and he hurriedly said, "Your Majesty, spare me, spare me." Two guards with sabers quickly ran in, looked at the eunuch kneeling on the ground, and pulled out the long sabers at their waists. "Stop." The martial emperor looked at them, and his gaze moved to the weapons in their hands. He took 2 steps back and said coldly, "Who allowed you to bring weapons in?" The two of them stopped in their tracks and looked at each other with a blank expression. The martial emperor looked at the two of them coldly, stepped down. The emperor's recent actions were a little unusual, which puzzled the officials. On the first day, he announced the news of the imperial army personally going into battle, and ordered the officials to prepare immediately, without delay. The next morning, during the morning court, he arranged other matters for the officials in charge of this matter, and did not mention the matter of the imperial army personally going into battle. The official had only asked a question, and was beaten 20 times. From then on, no one in the court dared to mention the matter of the imperial army personally going into battle. This was the biggest national matter since the beginning of the year, and it was silently shelved. Secondly, he also strictly ordered that except for the city defense troops, the imperial guards in the palace were not allowed to bring any sharp weapons within 300 feet of the emperor's palace. They were all changed to sticks, and bows and arrows were not allowed to be brought into the palace. Even when the officials went to the court, they had to undergo extremely strict inspection. When they entered the palace, they had to first enter a small room, take off their clothes, and be searched before they could go to the hall. In addition, the food made by the kitchen had to be tasted 10 times. When the emperor went to bed, there were no less than 300 guards outside the bedchamber, and the experts in the palace were always by his side. The officials only found out later that there was actually someone who was extremely daring and rebellious, and used 1,000,000 taels of silver as a reward for the emperor's head. Not to mention the value of the 10 divine weapons that could cut iron like mud, the current national treasury of the Wu Kingdom could not even take out 1,000,000 taels of silver. It was unknown who had such a large amount of money. Did their family's money all fall from the sky? In a certain province of the Wu Kingdom, the sky had just brightened, and there were few pedestrians on the official road. At a certain moment, a black dot suddenly appeared on the horizon at the end of the official road. The speed of the black dot was extremely fast. When it got closer, it was discovered that it was an old man with disheveled hair and ragged clothes. The old man was travel-worn, and his hair had already been frozen. There was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth that had not dried yet. He suddenly turned his head and said loudly, "Crazy woman, you spared no effort to chase me for more than 2 months. When have I, Yang Wanli, ever offended you?" Behind him, an old woman on a horse didn't answer. She drew her bow and shot an arrow. The old man moved his body to the side and narrowly dodged it. At this moment, the depression in his heart had reached its peak. This old woman's martial arts were on par with his, but she was an out-and-out crazy woman. When she fought, she would not care about the consequences. She would injure herself and hurt the enemy 1,000 times. Even if he could defeat her, he was afraid that his cultivation level would drop, and his foundation would be destroyed. There would be no hope for him to break through in this lifetime, therefore, he could only avoid her. As a result, she relentlessly chased him for more than 2 months. Even though he was a member of the royal family, had great self-restraint, and had cultivated his character for a long time, he couldn't help but feel angry at this moment. He turned his head and said loudly, "Crazy woman, what enmity do I have with you? Why do you hate me so much? Could it be that this old man stole your man when I was young?" Shio, shio, shio. This time, 3 arrows were shot consecutively. Chapter 1091. 1,000,000 taels of silver wasn't a lot. Li Yi didn't know how much money his family had. Ruoqing was the housekeeper of the family. She was in charge of the operations of the brothel and the shop. If there was a need for money, she could withdraw it directly from the accountant. If he could solve the problem of the Wu Kingdom with 1,000,000 taels of silver, it would be a great deal. Unfortunately, the emperor of the Wu Kingdom was holed up in the palace. The palace was heavily guarded and had many experts. No matter how powerful an assassin was, it was unlikely that he could succeed in such an environment. Li Yi didn't pin his hopes on those martial arts heroes. Even if he couldn't buy the head of a martial emperor, it was enough to disgust him. Su Zheng, who was in the Nanzhou, had just sent news yesterday that the governor of the Nanzhou had gathered more than 20,000 troops from the surrounding 4 prefectures and counties. He had also prepared provisions and supplies. He wanted to take down Sangzhou in one fell swoop and would immediately send troops. The Nanzhou wasn't far from Sangzhou. If they marched urgently, they would arrive in 3 days. If they weren't in such a hurry, they should arrive in 5 days. Wei Liang and the others were already discussing the tactics to face the enemy. In terms of numbers, they only had half of the enemy's troops. But in terms of strength, these 10,000 people were equivalent to an army of tens of thousands. What they needed to do was to achieve victory with the least losses. Of the 73 prefectures of the Wu Kingdom, more than half were still under the control of the Wu Kingdom's imperial court. They only occupied the small Sangzhou. There was still a long way to go. If they were to face 20,000 troops, they would have to pay a heavy price to win. How could they fight in the future? Everyone was very busy recently. As the chief commander of the defense of the city, Wei Liang needed to discuss with his subordinates to formulate a strategy to deal with the enemy. Old man Wang was busy fleecing the landlords and old moneybags. To a certain extent, he had to redistribute the production materials. He also had to appease the village gentry who had become restless after being fleeced and not cause more chaos. In addition, he had to select some educated and capable people to manage the grassroots troops. Rebelling was not as simple as fighting and killing. It was a very complicated and tedious task. Fortunately, Yang Liuqing had a group of reliable leaders by his side. Otherwise, the troops that they had painstakingly built would have collapsed from within before they could even reach the imperial capital. After lunch, Li Yi and Rui Ruoqing went out for a walk. Tsang Prefecture was different from Shu Prefecture and Rui City. The people here had suffered from the chaos of war and knew how difficult it was to achieve peace. In front of a great enemy, almost everyone in Sangzhou City was a soldier. The citizens did their best. Even if they could not personally participate in the battle, they helped to move the black logs and rolling stones to the city walls. On the streets, people were rushing. Compared to Shuzhou and Rui City, it was a different kind of liveliness. Rui and Ruoqing preferred peace and quiet. They probably didn't like this kind of liveliness. What they liked was to settle down in a place and live a simple and stable life. Or they could abandon worldly affairs and be together as a family. They could go anywhere. For the past few years, he had made them run all over the place with him. Ruoqing had also inexplicably become the empress and shouldered an even heavier burden. It was really difficult for them. If they could conquer the 5 prefectures this time, Yang Liuqing would be able to thoroughly establish a foothold in the northwest of the Wu Kingdom. Apart from the imperial court, they would be the greatest power in the Wu Kingdom. Unless the imperial court of the Wu Kingdom mobilized all of its military forces and gathered hundreds of thousands of soldiers to encircle and annihilate them in one fell swoop. Otherwise, no one would be able to do anything to them. After this, he could completely relax. The situation in the 5 prefectures was stable. Mississippi Lu also didn't need to worry about her precious disciple anymore. Tsang Prefecture's military camp. Wei Liang had just received a secret letter. After he opened it in front of everyone, he said in a low voice, "News from Nanzhou. The enemy will fall into the trap in 5 days. Inform the entire army to prepare for battle." Nanzhou, in front of the capital. A general wearing armor rode on a horse. A deputy general beside him dismounted and knelt on one knee. He cupped his hands and said, reporting to the general, "General Zhang is leading a vanguard of 2,000. They are escorting the provisions and are already 30 li away. Depart." The general nodded. He turned his head and said in a low voice, "Follow me to suppress the traitors. Suppress the traitors. Suppress the traitors. Suppress the traitors." The army of 20,000 stood neatly behind him and shouted in unison. Their voices echoed several li away and could be clearly heard throughout Nanzhou City. The provincial governor of Nanzhou stood on top of the city wall and watched the army of 20,000 gradually leave. A trace of worry appeared on his face. He murmured, "This time, all the cities of Nanzhou and Lin province have sent out their guards. The city defenses are empty. If the traitors take advantage of this weakness to invade, what should we do?" An official beside him smiled and said, "Lord Provincial Governor, you worry too much. Those traitors are nothing more than a motley crew. They are just showing off their might outside the capital. How would they have the guts to attack the capital? What's more, the largest group of traitors in the east only has a little more than 1,000 people. With how sturdy the capital is, without 50,000 soldiers, how could they easily break through?" The official looked down and said, "Unless the city gates can be opened from the inside, even so, we can't let our guard down." The provincial governor of Nanzhou nodded and said, "Even if that Song province is breached from the inside, we can't let our guard down. In the next few days, have people step up the patrols. Send more people to the city gates to guard against those traitors." This lowly official understands. Although Nanzhou was not located in the hinterland of the Wu Kingdom, it was not as remote as Tsang province. The lives of the common people were slightly better. At the city gates, the army of 20,000 had just set out. The common people had retreated several li. Only after they had left did the city gates return to their usual order. Pedestrians and peddlers poured in from outside the city, appearing somewhat disorderly. After being reprimanded by the guards at the city gates, they obediently lined up and entered the city in order. When a man carrying firewood entered the city gates, he accidentally tripped. The firewood on his back scattered all over the ground. He hurriedly bent down to pick it up. "Do you know how to walk? Hurry up and pick it up. Don't block the way." A guard walked over while cursing. He bent down to help him pick up the firewood. The man revealed a grateful expression. He grasped the guard's hand and said, "Thank you, big brother official. If you're done, hurry up and go. There are still people waiting behind you." The official waved his hand and turned to leave. After the man carrying the firewood left, the city gates returned to normal order. The official returned to his original position. He tilted his head slightly and met the gaze of his comrade beside him. He moved half a step to the side and handed a piece of paper to him from behind. East of Nanzhou, in a certain mountain. Ever since the collapse of the Wu Kingdom, heroes had risen. Some were powerful enough to occupy a city or a province. The weaker ones could only occupy a small county and were easily exterminated by the imperial court. Thus, most people had no hope of occupying a city and could only become roving bandits, plundering everywhere. In this mountain forest east of Nanzhou, there was a force of about 1,000 people. Relying on the advantage of the terrain, they had withstood the encirclement and suppression of the government several times. After taking root here, they became the largest group of bandits in the vicinity of Nanzhou. The leader of this group of bandits called himself the Roaming King. His name was extremely resounding in the vicinity of Nanzhou, enough to stop children from crying at night. But at this moment, this Roaming King, who was also a well-known figure in the eyes of the Nanzhou government, did not seem like the king of a mountain at all. With a flattering expression, he looked at the young woman sitting above and asked, "Big sister, the garrison of Nanzhou has just set off. The city is empty. When do we make our move?" You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.